Chapter 56. The Battle Plan. Over 10 days and nights had passed since Quen's iron-fisted assault on Jawbreak Island. The salty sea breeze still swept across the rugged isle. The air no longer carried the clamor and stench of pirates but instead the fresh scent of timber, the sharp tang of tung oil, and the steady rhythm of hammers striking ship planks. Roro and Esser Jorah Mormont had returned from Spearhandle village with rich spoils. A dozen heavily laden flat-bottomed barges, their hulls sunk deep into the water, slowly entered the crude dockyard on Jawbreak Island's western shore, a natural bay only slightly reshaped for the task. Supplies piled high as mountains. Sturdy oak and pine beams, barrels of pungent tung oil, coils of tough flax rope, thick rolls of linen sailcloth, and dozens of Tyrosh shipwrights. Quen stood on a towering reef at the dock's edge, overlooking the busy scene below. Sunlight broke through thin clouds, scattering glittering reflections across the sea that lit his calm, water-still face. He had merged the costly Tyrosh craftsmen with Jawbreak Island's original pirate shipwrights. Under Roro's coordination, they worked ceaselessly, day and night, to repair the warships battered in the naval battle. In the shipyard, the craftsmen toiled like ants, stripping broken planks, replacing rotted ribs of the keel, hammering in red-hot nails, and sealing seams with hemp soaked in tung oil. Quen knew Sothoryos could descend upon them at any moment. Every ship repaired was another stake in his claim to survive the stormy sea. As for Weeping Reef Island, the looted pirate lair, Quen did not dismiss it. He ordered Hal to select 100 elite men, led by several seasoned former pirate captains of Jawbreak. With ample supplies and crossbows, they fortified themselves in the island's stout watchtower. Their mission was clear: to watch the surrounding waters, act as the forward eyes for the Grey Gallows Archipelago and the eastern approaches of Bloodstone, and to keep stray pirates from seizing it for Salader's use. Only days ago, through the well-informed Tyrosh merchants of Spearhandle village, Quen learned that Sothoryos was frantically rallying the Stepstone's scattered pirate remnants. The Prince of the Narrow Sea was clearly enraged by the meteoric rise of Quen, the Eastern Sorcerer, and felt threatened as never before. He was determined to risk everything in one decisive battle. In preparation, Quen had long since ordered Roro and Hal to send swift longboats and oared skiffs to scout like ghosts through the broken seas east of the Grey Gallows and Bloodstone, where reefs and shoals shattered the waters into a maze. Yet strangely, the dreaded swarm of pirate ships never appeared. The waters held only ordinary merchantmen and scattered pirate skiffs. Salader's vast fleet seemed to have vanished into thin air. The silence was unnatural, like the suffocating pressure before a storm. It tightened Quen's nerves with each passing day, suspicion quietly gnawing at him. He refused to believe Saladhor would simply abandon the fight. This stillness felt like nothing but the calm before the tempest. He dispatched his most trusted men, disguised as merchants, time and again into Spearhandle village to gather news. Finally, they returned with a key piece of intelligence reeking of conspiracy. The Lyzon. Quen's brows furrowed into a deep scowl. He fixed his gaze on Roro, who had come to report, and spoke in a low, cutting tone. "You mean Lee has directly stepped in, sponsoring Salader's warships? How many?" Roro shook his head, his expression grave. "Lord, the Tyrosh and Spearhandle are tight-lipped. They reveal nothing about the exact numbers or ship types. They only let slip this much: Lee has invested heavily. Their goal is clear: using Saladhor as their blade to cut you down, the unstable factor, and seize absolute control over the trade routes across the western and central stepstones." Quen paced in silence as the damp sea wind whipped across his face, tugging at the black hair on his brow. He murmured the names, Lee, and Tyrosh, and a cold, knowing smile curved his lips. Interesting. These two daughters wage their open and hidden wars, yet see me as nothing but a pawn. The truth came to him at once: the Tyrosh had leaked this intelligence deliberately. Not out of goodwill, but as a clear ploy to set tigers against each other. They wanted him and Saladhor, backed by Lee, to clash. At least Lee had put real coin into Salader's hands. But Tyrosh, they sat on a mighty fleet and vaults of gold, yet confined themselves to selling timber and tung oil in Spearhandle village. They watched from the mountain as the beasts fought, waiting for him and Saladhor to bleed each other dry before swooping in to claim the spoils of the sea. HMPH. Quen let out a quiet, unreadable chuckle, his fingers tapping lightly against the cold stone windowsill. "Seems I underestimated Tyrosh. The waters of the stepstones run deeper than I thought." His tone carried no trace of anger or admiration, only a deep and wary vigilance. Roro spoke with deep concern, interrupting his thoughts. "Lord, The issue now is that regardless of how many warships Lee has provided, Salador's fleet has already grown significantly stronger. If we choose to meet them head-on in open waters. He hesitated, his words turning unusually cautious, even tinged with a faint bitterness. Our chances of victory are not promising. Behind those simple words lay the near-hopeless gap in strength. The pirates already knew these treacherous waters better than anyone. Now, with Lee lending them formidable naval power, Quen's few newly repaired paddle sail ships and hastily commandeered merchant vessels would be like eggs thrown against stone before an enemy both superior in numbers and equipment. Quen turned, his deep eyes steady, showing no hint of panic, only a cold gleam of clarity. Who says we must clash head-on in open waters? Roro, you and I both know our true strength lies in the Dragon Soul Guards. In heavy armor, blades in hand, they are an unbreakable wall on land, sweeping aside armies. But on a cramped, rocking ship. Through repeated battles, most of all the brutal night fight at the tidal reefs, Quen had come to fully grasp the guards' strengths and their fatal weaknesses. These silent warriors had unmatched defense and strength beyond ordinary men. In close quarters boarding combat, a single Dragon Soul Guard could suppress 10 pirates. Yet the harsh reality of naval warfare shackled their power. The narrow decks left them little room to fight, and the flimsy gangplanks during boarding allowed only a few to cross at a time, robbing them of their overwhelming advantage in formation. If that were the only problem, it might be managed. But worse was how the cunning pirates had adapted. No longer would they foolishly rush to fight these armored warriors hand to hand. They had learned. Kago's tactics had proven it. At the tidal reefs, the pirates of Jawbreak Island used their swift ships to ram the exposed flanks of Quen's vessels, splintering keels and hurling men into the icy sea. Then, from a safe distance, they rained down heavy bolts and even stones from catapults. The guards' famed armor turned against them under such relentless fire. Once overboard, they became helpless, sinking targets stripped of all combat power. If the waters that night hadn't been shallow enough for rescue, the losses would have been devastating. Unless, Quen's gaze moved from Roro to Hal, who had been listening in silence. Unless we can drag the fight off the open sea, where they hold absolute dominance, and into ground where the Dragon Soul Guards can truly shine. Islands, beaches, or a trap where they have no choice but to meet us blade to blade, stripped of their ranged advantage. Roro's hand stroked the stubble on his chin as he thought, then his eyes lit with sudden clarity. Lord, do you remember Kago's ships? They all had bronze rams on their prows. If we could. A ram, Quen's mind flared to life, racing ahead on Roro's thought. Mount them on merchantmen, use their bulk and inertia to strike. But merchant ships are too slow, too clumsy. With the wind at their back, maybe. But against the wind, they'd be little more than targets. And even if they struck true, they'd only smash the enemy's sides and decks. To shatter a keel in one blow? Unlikely. He paced, words spilling faster, as if locked in a storm of thought with himself. Then, like lightning splitting the night, a word flashed through his mind: fire. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 57. Janice's Discovery. Fire rides the wind. Quen stopped abruptly, eyes blazing with sudden clarity. He had overlooked the oldest and most effective way the weak could triumph over the strong at sea. Across the vast scroll of history, every miracle of naval warfare that entered legend had used fire as its blade, consuming mighty foes in flames. Roro, Quen's voice rang with exhilaration, as though a veil had been lifted. If we wait for the right wind, strip those heavy merchant ships down to bare weight with only helmsmen aboard, then pack their holds with tinder, dry hay, grease-soaked rags, even tung oil from Spearhandle village. Send these fire ships, running with the wind, straight into the heart of Salador's clustered fleet. Once they strike and ignite, fire feeding on the wind fanning the fire, can you imagine the sight? Roro and Hal's eyes lit up at once, as if they already beheld the inferno. Hal licked his cracked lips, his voice carrying the cruel edge of a pirate. Burn them to cinders. Those lies in ships, sails, ropes, tarred hulls, they're perfect kindling. Once alight, no one could save them. But, his tone shifted, hard and pragmatic. To unleash their full power, we'd need to draw the fleet into a straighter bay where they can't spread out or maneuver. Force them into a crush, colliding, trapped. Then none would escape. Quen's face broke into the most confident smile since the war began. His gaze swept over the two men. And who better than seasoned sailors like you, who've prowled the stepstones for years, to know where the natural traps lie? Where can we drive Salador and his Lysan allies so tightly that even with wings, they could not escape? He clapped Roro's shoulder, then turned to Hal. Gather every captain who knows these waters. Now, we'll choose a grave Salidhor will never forget. That night, in a stone chamber hastily turned into a war room, lamps burned bright. A rough sea chart lay spread across a great wooden table. Quen, Roro, Hal, and several veteran pirate captains familiar with reefs, currents, and narrow straits huddled around, voices rising in heated debate. Charcoal traced routes and marks across the parchment. One site after another was proposed, then struck down. At last, a name heavy with peril and promise was chosen again and again, Bone-Gnawing Channel. A narrow passageway hemmed in by jagged volcanic islets, swift waters, reefs thick as teeth. Its mouth allowed only a few ships to pass abreast, yet within lay a deceptively open pocket. If Salidor's fleet could be lured inside, then cut off with fire ships at the mouth and set ablaze, the balance of victory might be shifted. The details were refined without pause. How many fire ships, how to disguise them, the moment to ignite, the covering vessels, the Dragon Soul Guard's ambush onshore, every piece had to align. By the time the plan was fixed, pale dawn light already touched the sky. The next morning, Quen did not remain on Jawbreak Island to oversee. He left the repairing of ships, the outfitting of fire ships, the drilling of sailors, and the watching of Grey Gallows waters to steady, reliable Roro and Hal, seasoned in pirate war. He himself, with Jelena at his side, boarded a swift-oared longship and returned to Torturer's Deep. Though Jawbreak's fortress was broader, more comfortable, with finer walls and lodgings, Quen had never moved his core men and treasures there. To him, Torturer's Deep remained safer, its labyrinthine sea caves, perilous landing points, and perfect secrecy unmatched. More than that, it guarded what could never be lost: dragon eggs, ghost grass, a colossal block of black stone, and precious tomes carried from the ruins of Valyria. Janis had stayed there, day and night, tending experiments on ghost grass and poring over those cryptic texts. His sudden return came from an urgent message she had sent through the Dragon Soul Guards. Her study of the black stone had uncovered something astonishing. The longship cut through blue waters, winding between jagged reefs, until the grim cliffs of Torturer's Deep loomed into view. As soon as they landed, Quen and Jelena moved swiftly through the guarded cave passages, straight to the vast cavern Janis had remade into her laboratory. The chamber was dim, lit only by a few whale oil lamps casting pale yellow halos. The air was thick with brine, the bitter scent of plant sap, and the must of parchment and old ink. Janis sat with her back to the entrance, bent over a rough stone table, reading by lamplight from a tome so heavy it could have served as a shield. Her long, silvery hair was tied simply at her nape, though stray strands fell against her pale neck and ears, glinting softly in the light. Her face was calm and intent, violet eyes racing across the page, long lashes casting faint shadows on her cheeks. In that cold, dark cavern, the glow of her focus made her strikingly beautiful. Sensing a familiar presence, Janis lifted her head. When she saw Quen's tall figure at the doorway, joy burst unrestrained in her eyes, like a lantern flaring a light in the gloom. Lord, she set the book aside and hurried forward, her voice carrying a faint, barely restrained excitement. It's such a relief to see you return safely. The battle at Jawbreak Island. Quen smiled warmly and waved a hand. It went more smoothly than I expected. We gained much, which is why I was delayed. He moved to the stone table, his eyes falling on the massive tome Janis had just set down. Its cover was bound in some unknown black leather, the edges badly worn. The spine bore faded gold thread stitched into flowing, intricate runes that seemed almost to shift, radiating an indescribable air of age and mystery. Is this your new discovery? Yes, my lord. Janis lifted the heavy tome with great care, as though it were a priceless relic, and solemnly placed it in his hands. Please look here, and here. She opened the book, pointing to passages written in deep red ink, her neat, crowded notes filling the margins. According to this treatise on the secret origins of Valyria, in the distant age before the Valyrian freehold was founded, the ancestors of the Valyrians mastered a forbidden blood magic ritual of immense power. Quen accepted the tome. It felt unnaturally heavy and cold in his grasp. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing at the passages she indicated. The words were in ancient High Valyrian, dense, archaic, laden with symbolism and metaphor, barely legible even to him. Janis spoke softly at his side, her voice trembling with a scholar's excitement. The ritual is described as a sacrifice to the stars, meant to gain a power beyond mortal reach, until at last, the stars themselves descend upon the world. The stars descend. The words struck Quen like thunder. His heart jolted. At once, he remembered the frenzied woman shouting in the harbor of Volantis. Archmaester Marwyn had said she was a priestess of the cult of starry wisdom. And if the blood mage of Tyria had spoken true, then the ancestors of Valyria, the emperors of the great empire of the dawn, those named for the colors of their eyes, had been the ones to perform such forbidden rites. But what was it they had sought in their sacrifices? What did the stars descending truly mean? A source of great power? Or some catastrophic doom? Quen's fingers absently brushed the cold, rough parchment as his thoughts surged, speculation and doubt crashing against one another. Could the doom of Valyria itself be tied to this mad pursuit of the descent of the stars? Sensing his shock, Janice pressed on, her words trembling with excitement. My lord, the key lies further. To fuel a blood ritual of such scale requires vast stores of magic. The text makes clear this magic does not come from nothing, but is infused through a special method into the core of the rite, this very black stone. That means. Her violet eyes glimmered with insight as she turned to the cavern's depths, where the massive stone loomed in silence. This black stone is itself a vessel, capable of holding magic in unimaginable measure. Quen followed her gaze. In the dim lamplight, the monolith's surface seemed deeper, its natural runes breathing faintly in the shadows. Janice drew a steady breath and voiced her boldest conclusion. Even more remarkable, the text claims this stone possesses powerful powers of purification and refinement. It can draw in chaotic, unstable magical energy from its surroundings, even cursed currents of blood magic, like those that tore loose in Valyria after the doom, and cleanse them, transforming the chaos into pure, stable magic that sorcerers can safely wield. No impurity, no curse, no violent surge of energy resists it. All is refined into pure essence. This stone has stood in Valyria for thousands of years. The power it has gathered within may be beyond all imagining, though for now, we cannot access it. Quen's chest hammered as if struck by a warhammer, his heart pounding furiously. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 58. The Theft of Ghostgrass. Magic, this was the foundation of his strength, the key to his sorcery. Yet in this age before the red comet split the sky, when the world's magical energy lay in a low tide, the magic within him was limited. Every spell of even modest scale had to be measured with care, lest he drain himself dry. That constant restraint was his greatest hidden worry, a chain holding back both his power and his plans. If Janice's theory was correct, if this black stone truly contained immense reserves of magic, refining it into pure energy stored within, like a vast, magical reservoir, from which he could draw at will, then he could break free of this age's shackles. No more carefully counting the cost of every spell. No more fear of exhaustion. He could spend magic as freely as breath. He pictured a future battlefield. No longer would the dragon soul guards be forced to endure the brutal disadvantages of naval combat. Instead, he would take the form of a dragon, unleashing torrents of dragonfire to burn all to ash. Saladar's fleet, Lee's armed merchantmen, even Tirosha's warships, reduced to blackened wrecks adrift upon the sea. That would be overwhelming power. Quen's fingers brushed the massive black stone that seemed to swallow the light, its surface cold and sticky to the touch. Yet the system gave no response. He frowned. If the stone truly held magic, the system should have been able to absorb it. What was wrong? Studying the mysterious markings etched across its surface, he recognized traces of blood magic. Perhaps, he thought with a sigh, it was that blood magic which blocked the system's absorption, requiring some means of activation. He turned to Janice. Then the question is, how do we begin the process? How do we draw magic from the stone? Pointing to the runes and ritual passages in the tome, he asked, does it describe a method? Janice's excitement dimmed, replaced with a flicker of frustration. That, my lord, is the greatest difficulty. The book's instructions are vague, written in metaphor and symbolism. After all my study, the only certainty I've reached is that the method must involve the stone's natural runes, and some form of resonance. But the exact procedure, I cannot yet decipher. She rubbed her brow in weary annoyance. I tried channeling magic into the black stone, hoping to awaken the blood magic within it, but it gave no response. Quen watched her, tired, but still fierce with determination, as his mind turned rapidly. Unlocking secrets of magic at this level was beyond what Janice alone could achieve in the short term. He needed a true master of magical theory, one versed in ancient rituals and the workings of power. A face rose instantly in his thoughts. Archmaester Marwyn. The man he had met briefly in Volantis. A Citadel scholar who had spent 8 years in Ashai, who had once instructed the witch Miri Moshe Duor, and who had delved deeply into the many branches of magic. More importantly, he scorned the Citadel's grey sheep, who denied magic's existence. Marwyn was a practitioner, not just a theorist. 3 or 4 months had passed since their meeting. By now, he should have returned from Volantis to Aldtown. Quen made his decision in that moment. When the war with Saladhor was finished, he would set sail for Aldtown himself and persuade Marwyn to come to the Stepstones. Here were Valyrian tomes, the Black Stone, and soon, living dragons. For a scholar obsessed with the ultimate mysteries of magic, this place was a treasure beyond price. Marwyn would have no reason to refuse. Janice, Quen said firmly, his voice full of approval, you've done exceptionally well. The value of your research surpasses even the naval battle outside. This may be the cornerstone of our path to true power. There was no exaggeration in his words. Once the Black Stone's secrets were unlocked, Salador's fleet, and even the balance of power across the Stepstones, would seem trivial. To ease her burden, and to check on another vital matter, he suggested they inspect the progress of the ghost grass. Janice readily agreed. The 3 left the library cavern, following a damp passage to a smaller cave near the coast where faint daylight filtered in. It had been turned into a ghost grass experimental field. But the site remained discouraging. The ghost grass, carefully transplanted into the soil of Torturer's Deep, showed pale, twisted roots drained of life. Its leaves withered and curled, dull and ashen, radiating only death. No matter how many methods Janice tried, these strange plants from the land of doom withered once removed from the cursed soil of Valyria. They could not survive. As Janice crouched to record the latest failed batch in her logbook, her eyes drifted toward the dry stone rack in the corner of the cave, where the remaining specimens were stored. Her hand froze. Her violet pupils narrowed sharply. No, her cry rang out in the silent cavern, sharp and urgent. The count is wrong, how could there be 1 bundle missing? Quen and Jelena instantly followed her gaze. On the stone shelves, the ghost grass lay neatly stacked, their twisted roots coiling together, faintly glowing with an eerie light. Quen's memory was flawless. He remembered with certainty. To awaken the 4 dragon eggs, he had consumed 900 bundles of ghost grass, leaving exactly 100 intact. Janice's experiments afterward had used only 6 bundles, carefully recorded in detail, testing vitality under different conditions, exploring possible cultivation methods. That meant 94 bundles should remain. But now, the shelves held only 93. Someone stole the ghost grass. Quen's voice dropped to a freezing edge. His gaze shot toward the 2 dragon soul guards standing motionless at the cavern entrance like carved statues. Driven by blood magic, these puppet warriors possessed razor-sharp senses, tireless vigilance, and absolute loyalty. Theoretically, no one could enter this heavily guarded core without their notice. Jelena frowned deeply. Closing her eyes, she reached through the blood magic link binding the Flame Knight and the Dragon Soul Guards. Moments later, she opened them and shook her head with certainty. Impossible, my lord. The guards registered no disturbance. No intruders were detected. Janice's face grew tense, shadowed with confusion. I'm certain, my lord. When I checked yesterday evening, there were still 94 bundles. Unless. A flicker of disbelief flashed in her violet eyes. Unless the one who took it used magic, enough to bypass the guard's perception entirely. Quen caught the shock in her expression, and a buried memory tore back to life. Among the slaves he had purchased in Volantis were several from Yiti. At the time, he had sensed faint traces of magic from 1 or 2 of them, though it was so weak he dismissed it. Later, when none of them displayed unusual behavior, and with other matters demanding his attention, he let it slip from his mind. But now, it seemed those slaves from distant Yiti were far from ordinary. Quen's lips curved into a cold smile. So, they've finally shown their hand. 1 comment 0 vote. Chapter 59, Princess of the Yellow Emperor Dynasty. Deep within Torturer's Deep, far from the noise and lamplight of the main cavern, a hidden grotto sprawled in damp darkness, its passages twisting like a labyrinth. There, 3 men and 3 women moved in silence, feeling their way forward with held breath. The only light came from the torch raised high by the middle-aged man leading them. Its flickering yellow flame barely cut into the blackness, casting a dim glow on the slick, moss-covered path beneath their feet and the jagged stalactites looming above. Your Highness, this way, mind your step. His voice was low, pressed down by a tension hard to miss. He angled his body past a sharp rock outcrop, thrusting the torch into a narrow gap ahead. Following close behind was a frail young maiden, her face disfigured by hideous scars. She faltered, unease clear in her trembling voice. Must we truly flee like this? The man who bought us, perhaps he. The middle-aged man stopped short, turning toward her. Torchlight caught the deep lines of worry in his eyes. Princess, forgive my bluntness. He may hail from Yiti as we do, but he hides far too many dreadful secrets. The ghost grass, the black stone, they call back the days of Carcosa. Every moment we remain at his side increases the danger of exposure. This is our last chance. We cannot look back. The scarred maiden's brow furrowed in pain. But where can we run? My uncle's hunters never relent. That Yiti man commands an army, his strength growing so quickly, perhaps he is our only hope to oppose my uncle, or even reclaim Yiti. Hope. The man's reply was bitter, heavy with despair, as if her naive thought had pierced him. Your Highness, be clear. Yiti kneels under the God Emperor's rule, and Carcosa groans under your uncle's iron hand. Even if we returned, no throne would await us, only cages and the headsman's axe. Our claim to rule lives only in the hearts of a few pitiful loyalists in Carcosa. Beyond the hidden sea, it is worth nothing. The scarred maiden shook her head stubbornly, clinging to her last fragile belief. But this Yiti man is different. He holds the ghost grass and the black stone. He must know something, or be searching for their secrets. Otherwise, how could he possibly? Her words cut off as sudden chaos broke. Clang, clang, clang. A dense, icy chorus of metal striking metal rang from the depths of the cavern. No, the man's face blanched. He ripped the short blade from his belt in an instant. The other two guards closed ranks, shielding the scarred maiden and the other women behind them. But they were already too late. Whoosh! The crushing dark of the passages ahead and behind split apart as countless torches flared to life. In their glare, silent figures stepped from the shadows. The Dragon Soul Guards. They closed in, pinning the fugitives where they stood. Despair washed over the six like a flood. Torturers deep. The great sea-carved hall. Whale oil lamps burned dimly, staining the vast space in hues of yellow and shadow. Quen sat high upon a roughly carved stone seat. Jelena occupied his right, her sharp gaze fixed forward, one hand on her sword hilt. To his left, Janice watched with violet eyes, her expression a mix of scrutiny and curiosity. In the center of the hall, the air pressed heavy. 6 fugitives knelt, forced down by the unyielding hands of the Dragon Soul Guards. The middle-aged man and his 2 escorts were bound fast with coarse hemp rope, their faces marked with fresh bruises and blood, clear signs of the struggle they had put up before capture. The scarred maiden and the 2 other women had only their wrists tied. Quen's icy gaze swept slowly across the group, his voice echoing against the stone walls of the hall. Now, tell me your true identities. From the slave square of Volantis, you slipped into my ranks. Why, and why did you steal my ghost grass? A suffocating silence filled the hall. Quen gave the faintest signal to a Dragon Soul Guard standing closest to the middle-aged man. Clang! With a piercing metallic screech, the guard suddenly raised his Valyrian steel longsword. In an instant, the blade locked onto the head of a young guard beside the middle-aged man. The sword ripped through the air with inhuman speed and power, coming down mercilessly. Stop, I'll talk. At the last possible instant, the middle-aged man's eyes bulged as he roared. The blade halted just an inch from the young guard's throat, its icy edge slicing several strands of his flying hair. The guard collapsed to the floor, drenched in cold sweat, the shadow of death suffocating him. Quen's gaze shifted to the middle-aged man, cold and unshaken. The man gasped, struggling for words. Lord, we truly are from Yiti, like you. Only we were struck by war, fell into slavery, and were exiled abroad. Quen's brow furrowed with disgust. He didn't bother to reply, his gaze flicking back to the sword-wielding Dragon Soul Guard. Please don't harm them. I'll speak the truth, all of it. A clear voice rang out. It was the scarred girl. Quen lifted his hand, and the guard's sword froze again in midair. The scarred girl drew a deep breath, her voice trembling yet clear. We are not natives of Yiti, nor of Lang. Our homeland is Carcosa. Carcosa. Quen's eyes sharpened like needles. The name stirred old fragments of memory. A city suspended beyond the known world, deep within the Dawn Mountains of the Far East, on the southern shores of the Hidden Sea. It lay outside the domain of Yiti's current nominal ruler, the Azure God Emperor, and was held instead by a powerful sorcerer who proclaimed himself the 69th direct descendant of the Yellow Dynasty. The Yellow Dynasty, an ancient realm that had ruled Yiti for centuries before the Azure. The ugly girl's voice grew heavy. We joined your ranks to escape pursuit from my uncle, the usurper sorcerer who now rules Carcosa. Her words painted a bloody scene. My father was Carcosa's last rightful lord. But a few years ago, one night, that demon, my uncle, corrupted by power and dark magic, murdered him in the cruelest way, seizing his title. He then locked me in a dark tower, waiting for the moment he chose to end my life. His greed and cruelty forced us to flee. With the sacrifice of a few loyal guards and maids, I barely escaped that cursed city. Wandering west, I disguised myself as a slave in Volantis, until I met you. Her gaze lingered on Quen, troubled and searching. Quen stared back at her. Your surname is Chai. The imperial line of the Yellow Dynasty bore the name Chai. The ugly girl nodded firmly. Yes, my name is Chai Yi. The middle-aged man beside her straightened his back and declared loudly, before you stands the rightful heir of Carcosa, the sole legitimate ruler of Yiti, the princess of the Yellow Dynasty. Enough. Quen's cold voice cut through his fervent proclamation, a flicker of disdain in his heart. Before absolute power, such hollow titles were laughable. He looked at the man's face, flushed with rage and humiliation, and said flatly, I remember you. Your name is Luo Wen, isn't it? Luo Wen clenched his teeth and nodded stiffly. It is, my lord. I beg you, show mercy and release our princess. Last night's mistake was born of madness. We are willing to apologize, to compensate you fully for the loss of Ghost Grass. We only ask that you spare her life. His tone was low, pleading. Apologize. Compensate. Quen let out a cold, derisive laugh, as if hearing the world's most absurd joke. If betrayal and theft could be erased with apologies and payment, what need would there be for swords and law? You trespassed into my forbidden grounds, stole my secrets, and were caught by me. That is the unshakable truth. Now you are no princess, no retainers, only prisoners beneath my feet. Release you. He shook his head slowly, his gaze as dark and deep as an icy abyss. Impossible. With a thud, Chai Yi dropped to her knees on the cold stone floor, her voice fierce with resolve. Lord, if you would show mercy and help me kill my usurping uncle, the kinslayer who murdered my father, I would do anything for you. Quen looked down at the princess, kneeling like dust before him, his eyes without the faintest hint of pity. For a promise as empty and uncertain as yours, I should travel 10,000 miles to make mortal enemies with a sorcerer I've never met, whose power is unknown. Princess Chai Yi, your promise is worthless to me. Can it win me Yiti's crown? At his words, Chai Yi trembled violently. After a moment of suffocating silence, she said, Lord, I know you've long tried to cultivate ghost grass. I can tell you a secret about how ghost grass can truly grow in abundance. At that, Quen's eyes finally flickered with a trace of emotion. 2 comments 0 vote. Chapter 60. Submit or die. Speak. Quen's voice was like ice. Chai Yi drew a deep breath, clinging to this chance like a lifeline. Cursed plants like ghost grass cannot take root in ordinary soil. In the valleys of the Shadowlands, vast stretches of ghost grass grow wild. Carcosa lies nearby. My uncle, a sorcerer steeped in black magic, often sent men to harvest ghost grass there. He even tried cultivating it in Carcosa, but every attempt failed. But one day, after purging my father's faction and leaving countless corpses rotting outside the city walls, the withered seedlings of ghost grass began to grow after drinking in the blood. Ghost grass only grows at the price of death. Quen's pupils tightened, her words exploded in his mind like thunder. In an instant, scattered clues connected. Why did ghost grass grow only in the valleys of the Shadowlands and the ruins of Valyria? The doom of Valyria, billions dead in a heartbeat. Was that flood of death not the richest soil ghost grass could ever ask for? And what scale of death had once swept across the Shadowlands, now thick with ghost grass? Chai Yi caught the shock and contemplation flickering in Quen's eyes and knew her gamble had struck true. She quickly cast out a heavier card. And your black stone, Lord. Quen's gaze sharpened to a piercing edge. You know of my black stone? Chai Yi nodded, her voice trembling. Because my uncle, the usurping sorcerer of Carcosa, also has one, an immense black stone almost identical to yours. Boom! A jolt of shock thundered through Quen's chest. An identical stone? Impossible. His had come from the ruins of Valyria. How could that sorcerer of Carcosa hold one as well? Where did his black stone come from? Quen's voice dropped low. Chai Yi didn't dare hold back, speaking quickly. It is a long tale. When my father still ruled the Hidden Sea, my uncle was already obsessed with forbidden sorcery. He traveled to Ashai, learning dark arts from the Shadowbenders. Later, he performed vile experiments on living civilians in Carcosa. My father, enraged, banished him to the Grey Waste. We all thought he perished in that desolation, but... Her voice quivered with pain. A few years ago, one night, he returned. He wore a tattered yellow robe, a pale mask covering his face. And most terrifying of all, he carried with him a colossal black stone, near identical to yours. His power had become monstrous. That very night, with the vilest of black magic, he murdered my father. Tears of hatred welled in her eyes. After that, the demon built a vast palace beneath the Hidden Sea, consuming countless lives in its construction. He sank that black stone into its deepest waters. From then on, he spent nearly every day within that cold, lightless palace, the stone his constant companion, delving into arts that blasphemed the gods. The people of Carcosa live in constant terror. A storm like never before raged through Quen's thoughts. The yellow-robed sorcerer had returned from the Grey Waste, sinking his black stone beneath the sea, hiding away in the depths to study. It all pointed to a chilling truth. That sorcerer too sought to unravel the secrets of the black stone. And his method, submerging it in water, was wholly different from the approach Quen and Janice pursued. Was water some kind of medium? A trigger? What secrets lay within the black stone? Where had they come from? Why were they split between two distant lands? And what had the yellow-robed sorcerer gained? Questions swarmed his mind like a hive of hornets, buzzing relentlessly, dragging his understanding of the black stone into darker depths. Forcing his thoughts down, Quen fixed his eyes on Chayik and asked the final question. Then how did you steal the ghost grass unnoticed, under the Dragon Soul Guard's watch? Chayik seemed ready. She raised her bound hands and struggled to pull back a ragged sleeve, revealing skin in stark contrast to her disguised face, smooth and pale as ivory. On the inside of her slender wrist was bound a ruby, perfectly round and dark as congealed blood. Through magic, Lord, her voice was faint, almost weak. This ruby was enchanted with great power by a shadowbender of Ashai. By invoking it, I briefly transformed into Lady Janice's likeness. Her eyes flicked toward Janice, seated beside Quen. It was only through her form and aura that I slipped past the guard's senses, entered the storeroom, and took a bundle of ghost grass. Her words explained the faint magical ripple Quen had sensed in Volantis. The gem's power had been at work. Quen froze. In the original tale, Melisandre too had wielded such sorcery. He pressed further. And what did you need ghost grass for? To replenish magic as well? Chayik nodded. It's no secret in the further east that ghost grass holds power. A little more magic helps this gem last longer. She finished, drawing a deep breath and focusing her mind. The ruby on her wrist suddenly flared, spilling out an eerie crimson glow. The light rippled outward like waves, wrapping her whole body. As it faded, it was as if a crude disguise had been stripped away. The hideous scars and sallow, roughened skin vanished like smoke. In its place was a face so beautiful it stole the breath. Her skin was fairer than snow, delicate as if it might break at a touch. Her features were perfection itself, like a divine masterpiece, brows and eyes as if painted, a straight, elegant nose, lips the natural red of cherry blossoms. But it was her eyes that shocked most of all. No longer the dull brown of her disguise, they now gleamed like the purest amethyst, carved from crystal, standing in striking contrast to the cascade of black hair that framed her face. In that moment, she seemed less like a mortal and more like an otherworldly spirit drawn from the scrolls of an ancient age, a vision of beauty at once pure and regal. This was the true face of Princess Chayik of Carcosa. Quen's gaze lingered on those violet eyes, touched with curiosity. Such eyes were vanishingly rare in the further east. Sensing his doubt, Chayik spoke softly. Lord, in the history of the Yellow Dynasty, one of its god emperors once wed a Dragonlord of the Valyrian freehold. Since then, descendants with Valyrian traits have occasionally appeared in the bloodline of the Yellow Dynasty. Quen rose slowly from his throne, hands clasped behind his back. He paced before the kneeling prisoners, each step pressing hard against the taut nerves of Chayik and Wen. Only the echo of his footsteps and the crackle of fire filled the hall, the air heavy with suffocating tension. It is a pity, Quen halted, his gaze sweeping over their faces. Even after all you have confessed, I still cannot release you. The hearts of Chayik, Wen, and the others plunged into despair once more. Quen's voice was merciless. Before you are two paths only. Submit to me, or die. What? Luo Wen could no longer restrain his fury. He struggled to rise, only to be forced back down by the dragon soul guard behind him. The princess revealed the key to cultivating ghost grass, and the earth-shaking secret of the usurper's black stone. Is that not enough to buy our freedom? How can you betray us so? Betrayal. Lo Quen's lips curved faintly. When did I ever promise that revealing secrets would win you freedom? You know too much of mine already. Do you think me foolish enough to leave such a fatal weakness at my back? Chai Yik's body trembled, her violet eyes filled with despair and unwillingness. She looked at Luo Wen, raging helplessly beside her, then at the cold man on the high seat. Her father's brutal death, the fall of Carcosa, the torment of her long flight, and now this, death pressing at her throat. Countless images flashed wildly in her mind. At last, the hatred buried deep within her heart, the hatred that had carried her to this moment, overcame all shame and resentment. Her voice rang with heartbreaking resolve as she stilled her guard's futile struggle. Her violet eyes locked on Lo Quen, as if etching him into her very soul. I choose to submit. A wise choice. Lo Quen's face showed not the slightest ripple, as though the outcome had long been decided. He descended the stone steps and stopped before the kneeling princess. Her tear-streaked face was still radiant, her violet eyes tangled with fear, humiliation, and a trace of defiance. Open your mouth. Lo Quen's voice left no room for refusal. Shaking with fear, Chai Yik hesitated, but obeyed, parting her lips. Lo Quen raised his left index finger, his will flickering. A thick, scorching drop of blood welled forth, pulsing with immense magic. Under her terrified gaze, he let that searing golden dragon blood fall into her open mouth. The cold, crushing force of the pact surged through her body with that single drop, striking at the very core of her soul. Chai Yik shuddered as if struck by lightning. A burning torrent, primal as life itself, swept through her limbs and bones, scouring her consciousness. It was as though her soul had been cast into a furnace, branded with an eternal mark. Deep within, on the book of contracts ignited in golden flame, Chai Yik's will trembled as she signed her true name. Buzz. In Lo Quen's mind, the system panel flickered. The number of flame knights rose to 3. Good. The contract I forged now runs deep in your soul. From this moment on, your life, your will, your very being exist only to serve me. His gaze turned to Luo Wen and the other guards, their faces pale with despair. As for you, for your princess's safety, I advise you to swear loyalty as well. Her life is bound to me now. Should I sense even a breath of betrayal, the dragon blood packed within her will show her what it truly means to beg for death. His words crushed the last trace of resistance in their hearts. It was as though their very spines had been torn away. With bone-deep resentment and numb resignation, Luo Wen and the others slowly lowered their heads. Chapter 61. The Nest Emptied. After spending several days in Torturer's Deep, Lo Quen returned to Jawbreak Island with Jelena and Chai Yik. Having become a Flame Knight, Chai Yik could now command 500 dragon soul guards with her magic. Torturer's Deep lacked enough corpses for her to raise, but Jawbreak Island still held many that had yet to be burned. As soon as they arrived, Lo Quen and Chai Yik went straight to the corpse storage. Chai Yik looked over the cold bodies as her magic spread outward from her like a tide. The stacked corpses suddenly convulsed, as if gripped and lifted by some unseen giant hand. Bones snapped with a sickening crack as they were forced upright. In the suffocating silence, 500 corpses completed their horrific transformation from decay to life, rising to their feet in perfect unison. Chai Yik's face turned pale as paper, her body swaying slightly. Such a mass resurrection was a crushing strain on her newly gained powers. Yet when she beheld these silent warriors, a flicker of awe still crossed her eyes. The Valyria armor and weapons prepared long beforehand were picked up and donned by the dragon soul guards one by one. Chai Yik stared at the death legion she had forged in an instant. She felt the cold bond that tied them to her soul, the shock of it all nearly stealing her breath. They were no longer lifeless corpses, but true instruments of war, fearless blades that belonged to her and Lo Quen alone. She clenched her fists unconsciously, her nails biting into her palms. With this, the total number of dragon soul guards under Lo Quen's command reached 1,500. 300 elites remained at Torturer's Deep, while 1,200 now garrisoned Jawbreak Island, becoming the strongest foundation of the pirate stronghold. Meanwhile, the army of the living was also taking shape under Jorah's training. Beyond the 500 elite pirates under Janus guarding Torturer's Deep, Jawbreak Island now held 1,000 pirates under Roro, 500 hardened pirates under Hal, and 2,000 directly commanded by Jelena. Together, the dragon soul guards and pirates numbered a staggering 4,700. But this growing army brought Quen not only power, but also crushing pressure. Each day, maintaining this vast war machine was like pouring gold into a bottomless pit. Warships needed constant upkeep, dragonbone reinforcement, new sails. Ballistae and catapults devoured costly timber and metal. More than 4,000 mouths needed food, cheap ale and salted fish were the bare minimum to keep morale from crumbling. Weapons had to be replenished. Quen even clenched his teeth and paid for sturdy leather armor for pirates who had once worn only linen. When these rough men first donned their matching gear, a faint sense of military discipline flickered through the once chaotic ranks. After a few months, his treasury of some 700,000 golden dragons had shrunk to just over 550,000. Dust filled the air over the training grounds. Jelena wielded a blunt practice sword, her movements sleek and predatory like a panther, her long hair whipping with each fierce slash and swift dodge. Her opponent was Shyvana. Strength isn't everything. Jelena's voice was clear, steady, sharpened by years on the battlefield. Look at your footwork, it's too heavy. Her sword point darted like a viper, striking precisely at the opening Shyvana left beneath her guard. The controlled thrust made Shyvana grunt and stagger back. Shyvana bit her lip, sweat trailing down her temple. The Flame Knight's contract was reshaping her body, slowly but surely. Strength stirred deep in her blood like molten rock beneath the earth, every heartbeat sending a stronger surge through her veins. But that power needed honing, skills forged by tireless training to truly control it. Jelena's teaching was sharp and efficient, imprinting blood-tested battlecraft into Shyvana's muscles, stroke by stroke. Jelena pressed forward again, her blade flashing down like rain, forcing Shyvana into retreat, parrying frantically. A sudden low sweep knocked her balance, sending her sprawling forward, Jelena's sword point poised firmly at the back of her neck. Shyvana gasped, lying in the dirt. Her eyes held no defeat, only burning determination. She pushed herself up, brushed dust from her lips, and said firmly, again. Not far away, in another yard, Essos Jorah Mormont hurled a burly pirate to the ground, drawing laughter and crude cheers. The former Lord of Bear Island now wore an expression of severe focus. He barked corrections, fixing the pirate's clumsy grips and chaotic formations. These outlaws might have fought often, but true discipline and coordination were still foreign to them. Quen stood with arms crossed at the edge, his gaze calm. Months ago, when he first met Jorah, it had taken dozens of moves to bring him down. Now, the knight who had once won Westeros's great tournament and remained battle-hardened even in exile could not last 3 rounds against him. Jelena's relentless, hands-on guidance had transformed his swordsmanship at a staggering pace. With every swing of the sword, it seemed to slice the air itself, precise and deadly. The sea breeze carried its salty tang across the training ground, lifting swirls of dust. Quen watched intently as Jorah drilled a group of pirates in a simple shield wall advance. Clumsy crashes of wood and iron mingled with coarse shouts and curses. Roro and Hal came hurrying up, arriving almost at the same moment behind him. The sly grin that usually lingered on Roro's face was gone, replaced by a tense, weighty look. Hal's brow was tightly furrowed, his fingers unconsciously rubbing at the hilt of the blade on his hip. Lord, Roro lowered his voice. Our eyes on Bloodstone report Saladar's fleet has moved. Quen turned slowly, the wind tugging strands of black hair across his brow. They're sailing here. Yes, Roro nodded sharply, his tone urgent. Nearly 100 warships, a black mass blotting out the horizon. Their sails fill the sky, they've left Bloodstone's harbor and are headed straight for Jawbreak Island. Quen gave a grave nod. We proceed according to plan. His gaze swept over Roro and Hal. All ships, fully supplied. All hands to stations. Prepare to weigh anchor. Aye, the 2 men answered together, eyes flashing with suppressed battle fire and a trace of unease. They turned and sprinted away, and almost at once the dock erupted with shouts and orders. At that moment Shyvana approached, her face still glowing with the sweat and flush of training. She looked at Quen's taut profile, then at the sudden storm of activity breaking over the dock. After a brief hesitation, she asked softly, Lord, are we going to war? Quen's gaze settled on her face. The princess of Carcosa still possessed a beauty that stole the breath, but the eyes that once held only the sorrow and confusion of a fallen kingdom now glimmered with something steadier, resolve. He nodded, his voice firm as steel. Yes, the key to conquering the Stepstones lies in this battle. Shyvana's heart stirred. These past days she had watched Quen steadily bring order to chaos, how he consolidated resources with precision, trained soldiers with ruthless efficiency, and forced even the wild pirate chiefs into obedience. A daring thought began to take root. If Quen could conquer the Stepstones and gather greater power, might he also help her reclaim Carcosa, and perhaps even restore the long-fallen Yellow Dynasty? The thought clung to her mind, refusing to fade. Yet she also knew Quen's nature would never allow such a plea, unless... Her gaze lingered on the sharp line of his jaw. Her lips parted slightly, as if words were about to spill forth. But in the end, 1,000 thoughts sank into a single silent sigh, her secrets hidden beneath lowered lashes. Quen seemed entirely unaware of her inner turmoil. His whole being was fixed on the storm to come, as clear, precise commands continued to flow from his lips. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 62, Bone-Gnawing Channel. The icy sea in the faint light of dawn was a heavy lead gray, the surface veiled by a low mist like a ghostly shroud, blurring the line between sea and sky. Through that dim, hazy backdrop, a vast fleet surged forward, nearly 100 oared warships of varying size advancing in formation, like ancient sea beasts crawling across the waters. The steady rise and fall of oars struck the waves with a dull, rhythmic splash, tearing apart the ocean's slumbering calm. At the front cut the Valyria, undisputed flagship of the fleet. Its towering prow, like the fang of a great beast, split fog and waves alike. On the bow, Sothoryos stood tall. He wore a fine velvet coat of deep burgundy, with high boots bleached bright and dazzling. Silver thread embroidered twisting vines along the edges of the leather. The sea breeze ruffled his carefully groomed beard and carried faint echoes of commands shouted by sailors farther off. At his side, a pale and gaunt young man stood with a slight stoop, his face stretched into an obsequious grin. His high, sharp voice piped up. "Honored lord, that arrogant eastern sorcerer will surely soil himself the instant he lays eyes on our fleet blotting out the very sky. 100 warships, who in the narrow sea could possibly rival your might?" This was Veritas, a eunuch advisor favored by Salladhor. A self-satisfied smile tugged at Salladhor's lips. He tilted his head, casting Veritas a sidelong glance. His confidence radiated like a palpable force. "Flee, even if he sprouted wings and flew back to his Essos nest, I'd drag him back, chain him to the reefs of Bloodstone, and let seabirds peck out his eyes. By the gods above, they will witness my resolve. This trickster from the east is doomed." A little behind him stood another of his eunuch advisors, a plump-faced middle-aged man whose expression was shadowed by unease. This was Mizomar. He rubbed his hands together before speaking carefully. "Lord, forgive me for speaking out of turn, but the reports say this eastern man does have some uncanny means. Venturing so deep, should we not take greater caution? The bone-gnawing channel is narrow and winding, filled with hidden reefs. If sorcerers..." Veritas's shrill voice cut through Mizo's words like an awl. He gave a derisive snort, his contempt undisguised. "Mizo, don't tell me you've been frightened by old wives' tales. However wicked the sorcerer, a knife across the throat sends him to meet his false gods. Tricks and shadows, nothing more, charlatans fooling the simple. Before Lord Salladhor's fleet, they're less than nothing." Salladhor let out a booming laugh, rich with superiority. He swept his arm wide as though he could already see victory banners flying above Jawbreak Island. "Veritas is right, these so-called sorcerers are nothing but..." "Lord," a sharp cry cut him short. The three turned to see a small rowboat slicing through the waves, racing toward the Valyria. At its bow stood Quen Sathments, captain of the Shayala's dance. His weathered face was carved deep by wind and salt, his sunken eyes usually keen, now filled with urgency. He scrambled nimbly up onto the flagship, not wasting a heartbeat on courtesies, and blurted out between breaths. "Lord, a scout ship reports enemy sighting near the entrance to the bone-gnawing channel. 4, maybe 5 ships, patrol craft under that easterner's command." A sharp light gleamed in Salladhor's eyes. Far from alarm, his face lit with the thrill of the hunt. "Good, after them, those must be his pickets at the gorge mouth. His fleet is small, sink one, and he is weaker for it. Signal the order, full speed, pursue." But Quen's brow was slick with sweat. "Lord, we must not rush in. Ahead lies the bone-gnawing channel. It's so narrow only 2 or 3 ships can pass abreast. The seabed is jagged with volcanic reefs, sharp as knives, with swift, treacherous currents. Worse, it twists and winds like a maze. I fear the easterner is laying a trap, drawing us in on purpose." Veritas hissed like a cat with its tail stepped on. "Quen, a few rickety ships and already are, Brave, Captain Quails. A trap, with what? That Easterner commands barely a few dozen tubs. You shame yourself with such fear. The smile drained from Salader's face, replaced by a dark scowl at his authority questioned. His gaze bored into Quen, then shifted to the mist-wreathed entrance ahead, where jagged reefs loomed in and out of sight. His tone was cutting, absolute. Pursue. That Easterner's fleet isn't even half the size of ours. He has neither the means nor the courage to ambush us in the bone-gnawing channel. Signal the fleet, change formation, close on them. He was certain that sheer numbers alone could crush any trickery. Quen saw the stubborn certainty on Salader's face and felt his heart sink. A cold despair seized him. He cast a venomous glare at the smug Veritas behind Saladhor, cursing him inwardly. Mizomar, who had kept silent until now, finally stepped forward, his voice edged with pleading. Lord, Captain Quen's concerns are not without reason. Even if we pursue, we should at least leave ships to guard the strait. If that Easterner proves cunning and sends vessels around to cut off our retreat, we'll be trapped in a true death trap. Blocked ahead and pursued from behind, the fleet won't be able to maneuver in such narrow waters. The consequences would be disastrous. Veritas answered with a sharp, scornful laugh, his tone dripping with mockery. Mizo, it seems you left your courage back on Bloodstone. An Eastern sorcerer, living off tricks and shadows, worthy of Lord Salader's fear. Ridiculous. A joke. Salader's expression grew as dark as the sea before a storm. His cold gaze swept over Mizo's round, tense face, past Quen's anxious eyes, and finally settled on Veritas's fawning, certain smile. Annoyance and anger, stoked by repeated objections, hardened in his eyes. He slashed his hand through the air, his voice as sharp as ice breaking. Enough. Since you insist so much, Mizomar, so be it. Mizo's heart clenched, his face draining of color. You will remain with Quen's Shayala's dance, holding position at the mouth of the channel. Salader's tone was iron. I will lead the main fleet into the bone-gnawing channel myself and crush those reckless Easterners. Let's see what tricks they can manage. A chill rushed through Mizo, as though an icy hand had clamped around his heart. The contempt and mistrust in Salader's voice struck like a lash. He opened his mouth to try once more, but Quen shot him a look, so tangled and heavy that the words caught in his throat. In the end, everything he might have said was swallowed in a single heavy sigh. The matter was decided, there would be no turning it back. Quen and Mizo returned to their boat in silence, rowing toward the Shayala's dance, moored alone at the edge of the immense fleet. The three-banked warship, built for speed, looked small and helpless beside nearly 100 heavy warships. As Mizo stepped onto her deck, he turned and looked at the great shape of the Valyria, Salader's flagship, slowly vanishing into the fog-choked channel. His heart clenched like it was caught in a frozen fist. Quen, he said bleakly, Lord Saladhor won't hear a word of warning now. It's all that fool Veritas. If we really are trapped inside the strait, what good will our little force be? Quen gripped the cold railing, his knuckles bone-white. He stared at the maw of the bone-gnawing channel, its jagged black reefs jutting like teeth, thick mist curling between them, the crashing currents groaning against the stone. His bitter sigh rasped in his throat. Mizo, you know what Lord Saladhor is. He's always seen the stepstones as already his, confidence bordering on arrogance. To deal with this Easterner, he's poured in his whole fortune, borrowed soldiers from Lee, and strong-armed the other stepstones factions into joining him. He needs a great, crushing victory to cement his authority, to prove his strength to every ally. Do you really think he'd listen to us now? Mizo watched the massive fleet slide forward like a bloated serpent, inching into the narrow, treacherous throat of the channel. A heavy foreboding weighed down his chest. Then all we can do, he said hoarsely, is pray. Pray that Easterner is only bluffing. Pray there's no ambush waiting in that cursed bone-gnawing channel. Pray. Quen gave a crooked smile uglier than a grimace. His eyes swept the misty sea with a sharp glint. The gods, I fear they've already closed their eyes. As the two spoke in low, uneasy tones, a lookout suddenly let out a scream, his voice cracked with terror. Gods, is that a kraken? Quen and Mizo lurched toward the rail. They followed the lookout's pointing arm. In the fog beyond the channel's mouth, a vast, shadowy shape was slowly rising. Its outline twisted and wavered with the drifting mist, forming and breaking apart, like some colossal kraken stirring from the deep. Quen's seasoned eyes narrowed, his pupils contracting to pinpoints. A rush of icy dread froze his blood. He almost roared the words. Damn it, we're under attack. He spun around and bellowed at the messenger. Quick, Send the fastest skiff into the strait. Tell Lord Salladhor that enemy ships are blocking the entrance. Their numbers. His eyes locked again on the dark shapes looming ever larger, his voice rasping like sand on stone. 10, 20, no, 25 of them. Mizo saw it too. A fleet was indeed bearing down on the strait, driven by a faint but favorable morning wind. But as the last shreds of mist peeled away and the ships came fully into view, confusion spread across Mizo's face. Quen, no, look again. Those are merchantmen, broad-bottomed, square-rigged cargo ships. Has that Easterner lost his mind? Dragging merchant ships into battle. Sure, the wind's with them, but they're clumsy and without oars. Once they enter bone-gnawing channel, with its reefs and whirlpools, they won't even be able to maneuver. How could they possibly match our oared warships? Quen narrowed his eyes, his gaze hawk-sharp as it swept the oncoming vessels. When his eyes caught the bows of the leading ships, his heart dropped and his face darkened further. No, Mizo, look at their prows. They've mounted rams. He drew in a sharp breath, his voice edged with disbelief. Is he trying to imitate shipbreaker, Kago? Ship against ship, but Kago used nimble, solid-oared warships. These merchant hulls are soft pine. At most they'll smash a hole in our planking before shattering themselves. They'd never touch our keel. What in the seven hells is he playing at? Mizo stared at the 25 merchantmen advancing like a wall of timber, his bewilderment outweighing his fear. Then, do we intercept? They may outnumber us, but they're still lumbering cargo ships. Our Shayalas dances faster, and with the strait to our advantage. Quen's brows knit tight, his gaze flicking between the ungainly merchant ships and his lone warship. He closed his eyes in torment, then opened them, his voice heavy with resignation and anger. Intercept? With what? We've only one ship. Charging them is suicide. Let them through. I want to see what these floating coffins can do against Lord Salladhor's fleet. And so, under the troubled, baffled eyes of Quen and Mizo, the 25 merchant ships with cruel rams affixed to their bows drifted past Shayala's dance. One after another, like mute, lumbering beasts, they slipped unhindered into the bone-gnawing channel, its entrance dark and narrow as a giant's throat. The fog soon swallowed their hulking forms, leaving behind only the heavy flap of canvas in the wind and the mournful crash of waves against stone. Chapter 63, Fireships. Within bone-gnawing channel, the scene was pure hell. The gorge walls rose like towers, built of slick, black volcanic rock coated in slimy moss, pressing in menacingly on the narrow waterway. Jagged reefs jutted up like the fangs of some monstrous beast, tearing the already limited passage into a maze of splintered channels. Sunlight broke into scattered shards against the cliffs, falling down sparingly. Mixed with the cold, ever-present mist, it shrouded the gorge in a suffocating gloom, heavy with unseen danger. The current crashed against the reefs, echoing with a wail like the cries of countless lost souls trapped in the abyss. Salladhor's vessel had surged ahead from the center of the fleet to take the vanguard. From the high stern castle, Salladhor peered through an expensive Myrish lens, straining to pierce the gray haze ahead. Through the mist, he glimpsed several vessels darting into a narrow channel, enemy patrol ships, the same kind sighted earlier. After them, don't let them get away. Excitement roughened Salladhor's growl, his voice booming in dull echoes along the constricted waterway. At that moment, a light rowboat fought its way out of the fleet's rear ranks. A sailor scrambled aboard the Valyrian, half collapsing as he gasped for air. Lord, Captain Quen reports urgent news, enemy ships at the strait mouth. 25 merchantmen, all fitted with rams, sailing straight into the channel. Salladhor froze, then absurdity twisted into a mocking grin. He slammed the lens down and burst into a roaring laugh. Ha, merchantmen, with rams, has that Easterner gone mad from hunger, or has my fleet driven him insane? To pit salted fish haulers against Salladhor San. It's an insult. Veritas shrieked in eager agreement beside him, his sycophantic laughter as shrill as a night bird's cry. A cruel gleam lit Salladhor's eyes, predator sharp like a shark scenting blood. Just what I needed to limber up. Order 30 warships from the rear to turn and surround those witless merchantmen. Crush them, and let their wooden coffins feed the fish. He could already see it. Clumsy merchant hulks splintering and sinking under the charge of his warships. The order spread quickly. At the fleet's rear, more than 30 pirate ships of varying sizes, crewed mostly by vassals, grumbled, but the sight of those slow, lumbering merchantmen, little more than floating targets, stoked their greed. Tempted by easy prey, they began to turn. Under their captain's curses, the oarsmen strained, driving their prows through the murky water toward the 25 merchant vessels. Cruel, contemptuous grins spread across pirate faces as though the spoils were already theirs. But just as they drew close enough to glimpse figures moving on the merchants' decks, the unexpected struck. On each of the 25 merchant ships, the sailors from Jawbreak Island exchanged brief glances. Without hesitation, they hurled their burning torches into the holds and leapt into the sea. Below decks, piles of dry timber, rags and nets soaked in tung oil, and barrels of cheap grease erupted in flames. Boom, boom, boom. It was as though 25 sleeping volcanoes had erupted at once inside the narrow gorge. Flames roared skyward with destructive fury. Orange-red tongues of fire licked greedily at masts, rigging, and hulls. Pillars of black, choking smoke twisted upward, staining the narrow sky crimson, painting the whole channel in blood-red light. Burning scraps of sail, like giant firebirds, shrieked as they scattered on the updraft. The flames cast wild, leaping shadows across the black cliffs and reefs. The pirate ships, grinning, ready to board, were struck as if by an invisible hammer. In an instant, every smile froze. Fire! Fire ships! Gods damn it! Turn! Turn! You fools, run! They're coming right at us! Screams tore through the gorge, shrill and broken, shattering the rhythm of oars and water. Terror spread like plague across the 30 pirate ships. Orders, loyalty to Saladhor, the promise of plunder, all of it was burned away in the face of the firestorm, leaving only the raw instinct to survive. Every vessel, large or small, whether willing or not, spun in panic like a startled school of fish. Oarsmen roared with desperate effort, driving their oars with a frenzy born of terror, fighting to escape the inferno that had consumed the channel. Worse still, the 25 burning hulks now rode the downwind. The high cliffs funneled the gale into a screaming wind that shoved the flaming ships forward like an unseen giant's hand. Even as their sails crumbled to ash, momentum and wind together hurled the blazing hulks faster than any oared ship could flee, straight into the middle ranks of Salador's fleet. Trailing black plumes of smoke, they charged like burning harbingers of doom. The rear squadrons of Salador's fleet, slowed by the narrowing channel ahead, had no chance to escape. When the towering flames lit the entire gorge and the screams from behind reached their ears, panic tore through every ship like a tidal wave. Aft, the stern's on fire. The fire ship's ramming us. Run. Clear the way up front. Move, damn it. 7 hells. We can't move, the channel's too narrow. The ships ahead, still unaware of what was happening, froze in terror as their own allies came barreling down on them in blind panic. In an instant, the narrow channel became a death trap. No escape. Crash, crack, the stern of a medium warship was torn open by the prow of a friendly vessel fleeing in terror. Splinters flew, and seawater poured in like a flood. Damn you, are you blind? The sailors on the stricken ship howled in shock and fury. But their cries were drowned by another oared ship, maddened by the sight of the fire ships. It swung sideways in desperation, its hull grinding hard against the reefs. A sickening crack echoed as its keel snapped clean through. Boom! One of the burning hulks finally caught the last small pirate vessel. The impact sent both ships shuddering violently as flames surged across their timbers like ravenous demons. Pirates screamed, hurling themselves into the freezing black water, splashing down like dumplings into a pot. The chain reaction of death spread uncontrollably through the channel. Panic drove the ships in the rear to force their way forward, desperate to escape the firestorm behind. But the lead ships could not advance, the channel was too tight, the flagship had given no order to accelerate, and some had even slowed to avoid hidden reefs. The channel roared with chaos, the thunder of hulls colliding, the shrieks of splintering timbers, curses and screams of men thrown overboard. The gorge became a vast echo chamber amplifying their terror. The frenzy swept forward like a tidal wave, faster than any order could ever travel. On the Valyria, Salador's arrogance had already drained away. The massive flagship heaved beneath his feet, not from the sea, but from panicked allied ships smashing into her stern again and again. What in the 7 hells is happening? Saladhor bellowed, clutching the stern rail to keep his footing, his voice cracking with shock and rage. Lord, the ships behind us have gone mad, they're ramming straight into us. An officer cried, his face ashen. Bastards! Stop them! Who dares strike the flagship? Saladhor roared, veins bulging across his forehead. But before the words were gone, another colossal impact slammed into the stern. Boom! The Valyria lurched forward as though the kraken itself had bitten deep into her hull. Men sprawled across the deck, rolling helplessly with the jolt. Salidhor staggered, nearly pitching overboard, until Veritas seized him in a crushing grip. Lord, gods, look ahead, a lookout shrieked in despair. Salidor's head snapped up. Through the smoke, before it smothered his sight entirely, his heart froze. Less than half a mile away, the channel's narrow throat, barely wide enough for a few ships abreast, was sealed tight. A rough count showed no fewer than 40 vessels. Most were solid-oared warships, their raised rams gleaming with a cold light in the swirling haze. Their masts loomed like a forest, their silhouettes like a wall of stone, barring every path forward. On their decks, shadowed figures stood shoulder to shoulder, armed with bows, crossbows, axes, and swords, their murderous intent radiating across the water. An icy despair seized Salidhor, rooting him where he stood. Chapter 64. Salidor's Doom. He opened his mouth, struggling for breath. Veritas had already collapsed to the deck in terror, his trousers soaked, the stench acrid and foul. Engage, fight. Salidhor forced the words out through clenched teeth, hoarse and rasping, every syllable torn from his throat. But in this death-ridden sea of fire and panic, his command was pitifully faint. The Valyria shuddered as another panicked allied ship slammed into her stern, the hull groaning under the strain. From the rear came greater chaos. The 25 burning hulks had finally plowed into the already frenzied center and rear of the fleet. Fanned by the wind and fed by oil, the flames spread as though alive. One warship after another caught fire, sails blazing like torches, masts snapping with thunderous cracks before crashing down into the inferno. Smoke billowed in choking clouds, blotting out the sky. The narrow channel had become a boiling cauldron. Pirates scorched by the flames shrieked as they hurled themselves into the freezing currents, only to be swept away in an instant. In their frenzy to escape fire and collision, ships rammed and shoved each other harder still, some even smashing allies aside and driving them onto the deadly reefs. Board them. Force the grapple. Break through. Salidor's eyes blazed red, like a gambler gone mad. Waving his sword, he bellowed until his voice broke. It was the only move left to him, his final desperate gamble. But the answer was not the pounding of oars. It was the shriek of death from ahead. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Bolts thick as a child's arm, their barbed tips glinting, and stones the size of millstones tore through the smoke from the wall of ships before them. They slammed into Salidor's vessels crammed tight at the front. Thud, crack. A medium warship's flank was smashed by a boulder, its thick oak planks splintering like kindling, a gaping hole torn wide as seawater gushed in. Squelch. Ah! One massive bolt ripped through 3 pirates pressed along the gunwale, skewering them like candied fruit before nailing them to the deck in a spray of blood and viscera. Boom! Another stone slammed into a ship just ahead of the Valyria. Its mainmast snapped with a report like thunder, crashing down with its rigging to crush the sailors below into pulp. Quen had never intended to board. He stood cold and unmoving on his quarterdeck, his gaze cutting through the smoke and chaos of the battlefield. His orders rang out clear and sharp. All heavy ballistae and catapults, fire into the densest part of their fleet. The gap of a few hundred yards was a chasm the Salidhor fleet could never cross. Quen's fleet obeyed with merciless precision. Bolts whistled, tearing through the air. Stones traced arcs of ruin, reaping lives and smashing hulls without pause. The ships clustered at Salidor's front had no chance to strike back. They burned, shattered, and sank. The Valyria, battered again and again by allied ships crashing into her stern, rocked and tilted like a dead leaf in a storm. Each strike came with the groan and crack of timbers splitting apart. Lord! The stern keels cracking. A bloodied officer staggered onto the stern castle, his voice breaking in despair. Salidor's face had drained of all color, his lips trembling. Any trace of composure was gone. Only one thought remained: escape. To shore. Now. Get the boats to shore. He screamed, his voice ragged and broken. But the command was needless. His men, consumed by terror, were already leaping into the icy sea like dumplings into a pot, swimming desperately toward the slick, mossy rocks along the cliffs. Survival drowned out all else. His loyal guards dragged and shoved him into a small boat, barely big enough for a handful of men. The oarsmen rowed like madmen, forcing the craft through drifting wreckage, burning slicks of oil, and the bodies of the drowning. Frigid seawater splashed over them, stinking of blood and charred flesh. Salidhor turned back. His once mighty fleet, the foundation of his rule over the stepstones, was nothing but a graveyard adrift in fire. Smoke swallowed the sky, flames writhed and devoured, ships broke apart and capsized. Screams, explosions, and the crackle of fire blended into a dirge of the end. It felt as if a cold hand clutched Salador's heart and tore it apart, bleeding him dry. Half a lifetime's wealth and power, all gone in an inferno. The small boat finally scraped onto a strip of rocky, uneven mudflat at the base of the cliffs. Salador stumbled ashore, drenched and filthy, icy mud flooding his silver-trimmed boots. He staggered upright, staring at the devastation. Pain and fury raged so fiercely within him he nearly fainted. But just as despair threatened to swallow him whole, a new horror arose. From the towering, jagged shadows of the black reefs on either side, a piercing, inhuman scream erupted without warning. The sound was sharp and brief, filled with the terror of imminent death, drowning out the ragged breathing of the survivors on the mudflats. Salador and his guards snapped their heads around like startled rabbits. From the seemingly lifeless shadows of the reefs, countless figures surged forth, clad in dark Valyrian armor. Their movements were perfectly in step. In the haze of smoke and firelight, the Valyrian steel swords in their hands gleamed with a chilling, merciless light. They came in overwhelming numbers, flooding across the flats in an instant. These silent warriors were the dragon soul guards Quen had hidden here. They burst out from the darkest corners like flawless instruments of slaughter, descending upon the pirates who had only just crawled ashore, dazed from terror, some still unarmed. Squelch, squelch. The sound of blades slicing flesh and shattering bone fell thick as a sudden storm. Screams rang out in waves, turning the small stretch of shore into a slaughterhouse. The dozen hardened veterans guarding Salador roared like trapped beasts, drawing steel in a final, desperate stand. But their blades struck the rippling dark armor of the dragon soul guards only to throw off sparks, leaving not the slightest mark. Every swing of a dragon soul guard's sword claimed a life with precision. On land, they were unstoppable. In strength, speed, and defense, they were leagues beyond the pirates. The guards fell like brittle stalks, swallowed whole by the silent tide of death. The screams ended abruptly, leaving only the wet crunch of steel through flesh and the thud of bodies hitting the ground. In only a few breaths, not one of Salador's men was left standing. The stench of blood choked the air. He stared in horror as the silent dragon soul guards advanced step by step. Terror gripped his heart so tightly it nearly burst. It's over. The thought thundered in his mind like a death knell. Before he could react, a flash of steel burst across his vision, swelling in his fear-dilated eyes. Squelch. A dull, wet sound, like a ripe melon splitting open. The world tilted and spun. The last sight his eyes beheld was his own headless body, clad in a velvet coat of deep wine red, toppling forward into the blood-soaked mud. His tall, bleached leather boots, traced with silver vinework, twitched once before sinking into the muck and gore. His once ambitious head, frozen in a mask of shock, terror, and bitter regret, rolled among the black reefs, only to be crushed under the blood-stained boot of a dragon soul guard. Prince of the Narrow Sea, Salador San, was dead. The last scattered pirates, still resisting, saw their lord, once to them a god, invincible, fall in an instant, his body and head parted. Whatever will to fight remained guttered like a candle in the wind, and went out. Clang, clang, weapons hit the ground one after another. The survivors, pale as corpses and trembling like leaves, dropped to their knees in the freezing mud and blood, raising their shaking hands. We surrender, we surrender. Chapter 65, The Proposal of Kingship. The blood and fire of bone-gnawing channel had drifted away on the sea wind, yet the ripples of victory still shook the stepstones. After sweeping away the last pockets of resistance within the gorge, Quen's fleet surged unstoppably against Salador San's stronghold, Bloodstone Island, and the neighboring Grey Gallows. The island garrisons put up only token resistance before raising their banners in surrender. At the highest point of Bloodstone Island stood the fortress Salador had once taken pride in. Now, atop its tower, his head, crudely preserved, hung from the flagpole, swaying gently in the breeze. Hollow eye sockets stared blankly down at the island he had once ruled. The head that once lorded over the narrow sea now served as the starkest proclamation of the new order. The age of the Prince of the Narrow Sea, along with his mighty fleet, had sunk into the depths of bone-gnawing channel. Inside the tower's great hall, shafts of light fell through narrow arrow slits, casting mottled patterns across the stone floor. The air was thick with the tang of salt and dust. Quen sat upright in a high-backed chair draped with coarse bearskin, with Roro and Hal flanking him, their sharp eyes sweeping the chamber. At the center stood two men, disheveled and uneasy. Quen Sathmans and Mizo Mar. When Quen's fleet emerged from the gorge and came upon their wandering warship, Quen had wasted no time. He lowered Salador's banner without hesitation, surrendering at once. Now they stood before the victor, awaiting judgment. Captain Quen, Mizo. Quen's voice was calm but carried clearly through the empty stone hall. You were counted among Salador's most trusted men. Then why, at that fateful moment in bone-gnawing channel, did your Shayala's dance not follow your master? Quen lifted his head, glanced at the pale-faced Mizo, and drew a deep breath. His voice came rough, edged with bitterness. My lord, it was not cowardice. Salador would hear no counsel. He paused, then went on. The bone-gnawing channel is narrow, strewn with reefs, and its currents fierce. Both Mizo and I warned him of the risks, told him it might be a trap laid by you. But Salador, blinded by arrogance, insisted your strength was too meager for such an ambush. To his ears, our warnings were the whining of cowards. He accused us of weakening morale, scolded us both, and sent us to watch at the gorge entrance. Quen listened in silence. He had not expected Salador to be so blinded by arrogance. Through these surrendered men, he understood why his ambush had gone so smoothly. A commander who ignored even the desperate counsel of his closest captains was doomed the moment he set foot in the channel. It had not been a simple tactical mistake, but a fatal flaw rooted deep in his nature. Salador's time is done. Quen's gaze swept over Quen and Mizo before settling on the swaying head outside the tower window. His tone was flat. You two, as his closest men, by rights should be cast into the dungeon to await judgment. The air in the hall seemed to freeze. Quen's back straightened instinctively, while beads of sweat slid down Mizo's brow. Judgment, here in the lawless stepstones, usually meant gallows, or being thrown to the sharks. But Quen's tone shifted. Yet you chose unconditional surrender, sparing needless bloodshed. More than that, at the channel's mouth, you did not bar my merchant ships from entering. That act was not only without fault, but a service. So I ask, will you serve under my banner? Quen and Mizo's hearts leapt. They exchanged a quick glance. They had let those fire ships through believing no single vessel could have stopped them. Yet deep down, they had also grown weary of Salador's obstinacy. Now Quen had named their choice a decisive act, one that tipped the battle. Those fire ships had indeed been the spark that set Salador's fleet ablaze and triggered its collapse. By casting their decision as merit, Quen had branded them with betrayal, yet also bound them with it. From this moment, they could no longer stand apart, nor easily turn to another master. The stepstones, the whole of the narrow sea, would see them as Quen's men. Any other power sheltering them would risk his wrath. Quen understood at once. The conflict on his face gave way to calm acceptance, even relief. He dropped to one knee, his voice loud and steady. My lord, Salador was arrogant, blind to reason, and favored only sycophants. He had long since lost all loyalty. I, Quen Sathments, swear to serve you. I will steer your ships through every storm, until death takes me. Under Salador, his bluntness and distaste for flattery had left him isolated. Though gifted with unmatched skill at sea, he could barely hold on to his captaincy. He had long watched lesser men rise through flattery while he remained stagnant. Now, in Quen's strength and the order he imposed, Quen glimpsed the possibility of something new. My lord, Mizo Mar also wishes to serve you. After Quen declared his loyalty without hesitation, Mizo too seemed to find his resolve. Casting aside his doubts, he pledged himself as well. For both men, the stepstones were the only place left to them. And now that the entire sea lay under the rule of the Easterner before them, what choice remained but submission? Quen gave a slight nod, his face betraying little. Very well, remember the oaths you swore today. You may withdraw. For now, you will serve under Roro. He will see to your ships and men. The two men, relieved as if pardoned, bowed deeply and left the hall at Roro's signal. The heavy stone doors closed slowly, shutting out the light and noise beyond. Only Quen, Roro, Hal, and a handful of dragon soul guards standing motionless in the shadows remained. The suffocating tension eased with the departure of the outsiders. Roro's face lit with unrestrained excitement. He stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. My lord, the victory at Bone-Gnawing Channel was beyond compare. Counting those inside the gorge, those outside, and the men surrendered on Bloodstone and Grey Gallows, we've taken a total of 5,500 prisoners. Salador's fleet, though most of it burned or was wrecked, left behind 75 ships of various sizes still fit for repair. And more than that, in the cellars of Salador's fortress, we found his treasure hoard. By rough count, the golden dragons, silver stags, plate, and gems are worth at least 400,000 gold dragons. 400,000. It was a staggering sum, and a flicker of satisfaction passed through Lo Quen's eyes. The fortune could not have come at a better time. Just then, Jelena entered the hall, fresh from completing the troop reorganization. "What of the prisoners?" Lo Quen asked, turning his gaze on her. Her voice was cool, precise. "My lord, as ordered, all 5,500 have been broken from their original formations. Every officer Saladhor appointed, great or small, has been stripped of command and detained. The soldiers have been thoroughly mixed by island and former faction, and folded into our ranks." She paused, then added, "There was some unrest, but the Dragon Soul Guards put it down quickly. A few ringleaders were executed. The rest are quiet now." Lo Quen nodded. "Break them apart, mix them in, place loyal men, make an example. This was the surest way to absorb a host of surrendered troops and keep them from uniting in rebellion." "Good. Roro, send the captured ships into the docks at once. Repair what you can. Those too badly damaged, break down for parts. I want them seaworthy again as soon as possible." "Yes, my lord," Roro answered at once. Those 75 ships, though battered, once restored would greatly swell Lo Quen's naval strength. Jelena continued with the details. "Troop distribution is as follows. Under my command, 2,000 original pirate soldiers, plus 3,000 reorganized captives, for a total of 5,000, with 400 Dragon Soul Guards attached. Under Roro, 1,000 original, plus 1,000 captives, totaling 2,000. Under Hal, 500 original, plus 1,000 captives, totaling 1,500. Under Chai, 500 reorganized captives, plus her original 500 Dragon Soul Guards. In addition, the Torturer's Deep is garrisoned by Janice with 300 Dragon Soul Guards and 500 pirate soldiers. Janice has also transferred command of another 300 Dragon Soul Guards to you as your personal guard. Altogether, my lord, your forces now exceed 10,000, 1,500 Dragon Soul Guards and more than 9,500 pirate soldiers." Even Hal, usually composed, drew a sharp breath. 10,000. In the chaotic history of the Stepstones, never had such a force been seen. True, the pirate soldiers lacked the training and discipline of the standing armies of Westeros. But sheer numbers alone were power, especially here, where the narrow sea was ruled by raiders and reavers. Roro could no longer contain his excitement. He stepped forward, his voice rising with fervor. "My lord, the Stepstones are yours. With Saladhor destroyed at Bone-Gnawing Channel, there is no one left in these seas who can oppose you." His eyes burned. "You should wear the crown. Become the true king of the narrow sea and the Stepstones. This honor is yours by right." "King," Lo Quen repeated the word softly, his gaze turning distant, as if beyond the rough stone walls he could glimpse the long tide of history washing over these islands. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 66. Journey to Aldtown. He recalled that in the history of the Stepstones, more than one man had styled himself king of the narrow sea and the Stepstones, Daemon Targaryen, Rackleo Rindun, and others. But each of these so-called kings held power for only a fleeting moment. After their fall, the Stepstones always slipped back into chaos, part pirate haven, part smuggler's paradise, part battleground where the free cities waged their shadow wars. It struck him that their reigns had all been so brief for a simple reason: the Stepstones had never possessed the foundations of a true realm. A nation needs people, land, food, and stable order. The Stepstones had little of any. Only a handful of islands, Bloodstone, Grey Gallows, Broken Spear, held scattered fishing villages. The land was barren. When Lo Quen first stepped onto Bloodstone, he found only the thinnest layer of soil, badly eroded, incapable of yielding barley, oats, or rye. Thus, the pirates of the Stepstones fed themselves with imports from both shores of the narrow sea or lived on salted fish. Worse still, the Stepstones had always been contested ground. To the Iron Throne, the islands were a potential staging post for invasion, a threat that could not be ignored. To the three daughters, Tyrosh, Myr, and Lee, they were territory within their own sphere of influence. Now that Lo Quen had unified the islands, he knew all eyes on both shores of the narrow sea would turn toward him. And that was exactly what he wanted. If he was to build a kingdom, he would need land, real land, capable of sustaining people and armies. Where could such land be found? The answer was obvious. The question before him was no longer whether to call himself king, but whom to strike first, Westeros or the free cities. Westeros. No, not yet. Invading now would be meaningless. Quen knew the path of Westeros' future. He could turn that knowledge to his advantage. Already, a plan had begun to take shape. He would not sit idle, waiting for the story to unfold. He would stir the waters, push events toward even greater turmoil than the tale had ever told, until the Seven Kingdoms tore themselves apart. Then he would claim the spoils. But the free cities, those were a different matter. Their strength was nothing compared to the Seven Kingdoms. While he maneuvered and sowed chaos in Westeros, he could strike eastward, breaking them one by one. There was another reason behind his east before west strategy. The others, the army of the dead beyond the wall. Quen had no certainty there. When he crossed into this world, the books had not yet ended. He had no way of knowing what the others truly commanded. Did they march with ice spiders, mammoths, ghouls, demons, even ice dragons? One day, he would go beyond the wall himself, see with his own eyes, and decide. And if the others did have such monsters at their side, he would not sacrifice himself for the good of Westeros. He was no savior. Let the followers of the Seven, of R'hllor, of the old gods, face them first. Let the so-called gods prove their strength. With his course decided, Quen's gaze hardened. He turned to Roro and Hal. Salitor styled himself Prince, for holding 2 islands. I hold the Stepstones entire. I am owed a greater title. Not for glory alone, this is how we declare our presence and strength to both shores of the narrow sea. Roro, Hal, you will see to the coronation. It will be held here, on Bloodstone. Choose a fitting day. It must be grand. Let the world bear witness. He went on, but before the coronation, I must leave for several days, to Aldtown. Aldtown. At once, Jelena stepped forward, her brows drawn tight, her face filled with concern. My lord, that is one of Westeros' greatest strongholds. Must you go yourself? Could you not send a messenger instead? Quen shook his head, his tone brooking no argument. I must go in person. The man I seek is unlike any other, he is vital. He holds the key to the very foundation of our future. He meant Archmaester Marwyn, the reclusive, arrogant, mage, obsessed with the higher mysteries. Magic was the heart of Quen's power, and the weapon he would need most when facing the unknown. And Marwyn could not be won with letters or envoys. This, he had to do himself. He turned to Jelena and explained, the war has only just ended. Every faction is still reeling from the shock, still digesting the news. This is a rare window of strategic respite. I must seize it. Once they recover, trouble will follow one wave after another. Jelena understood the urgency, but her concern lingered. You mean the free cities will soon challenge us? Not soon, inevitably, Quen replied firmly. Controlling the Stepstones means seizing their purse strings. They won't forgive it. That's why, while I'm away, you will hold full authority over all affairs of the Stepstones. Jelena nodded with solemn resolve. Yes, my lord. Quen's tone shifted. But you cannot remain on Bloodstone. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Not on Bloodstone. Correct. I need you to command from Torturer's Deep, because Janis will be coming with me to Aldtown. He had originally planned to go alone, but considering Archmaester Marwyn's eccentric nature and the likelihood of scholarly exchanges, he had changed his mind. Since fleeing the ruins of Valyria, Janis had made considerable progress in her study of blood magic. Her knowledge might well be the key to swaying Marwyn. But if Janis left, Quen needed a flame knight of absolute loyalty to guard Torturer's Deep. Otherwise, he would not rest easy. Chayik will accompany you to Torturer's Deep, Quen continued. Bloodstone will remain under Roro and Hal. You will hold the east with Chayik, guarding the gateway to Essos. Roro and Hal will hold the west from Bloodstone, watching Westeros. Together, east and west will reinforce each other, enough to keep the narrow sea in check and withstand any initial upheavals. 5 days later, at Bloodstone Harbor. The first light of dawn touched the sea breeze, carrying both the ease of victory and the promise of departure. A medium-sized galley had just docked, arriving from Torturer's Deep. This natural harbor, named Prince's Port by Salitor, was vastly larger than Jawbreak Island's meager dock. Quen stood at the quay, watching the bustle before him. Shipwrights worked on damaged warships, soldiers drilled, and surrendered pirates hauled supplies under the stern eyes of Dragon Soul guards. A surge of satisfaction welled within him, a sense of absolute control. Just days ago, this had been Salitor's den. Now, it was his. Light footsteps approached. Janice descended the gangplank, travel-worn yet radiant. It had been some time since they last met, and Quen immediately noticed the change in her. Her face had shed much of its youthful softness, her frame seemed taller, and her violet eyes now held the focus and sharp light of one who had immersed herself in arcane study. Yet beneath it all, the unquenchable energy of youth still burned. Perhaps the relentless strain of war had made him overlook how much she'd grown. For the journey, she wore a fitted hunting outfit tailored in a man's cut. A velvet coat of purple draped her shoulders, while black trousers clung to her long, powerful legs. Her silver hair, no longer left loose, was neatly tied back. At her waist hung a sharp sword, lending her a striking air of confidence and poise. "My lord," her voice carried the joy of reunion and the thrill of what lay ahead. "We're truly going to Aldtown, in Westeros." Her eyes sparkled with anticipation. Quen studied the vibrant young woman before him, and for the first time in days, the weight of slaughter eased from his heart. He smiled and nodded. "Yes, Janice, this will be our first step on Westerosi soil. Time is short, we must depart quickly." Janice nearly leapt with excitement, her silver hair catching the sun in rippling waves. "Marvelous. I've heard Aldtown is the most splendid of cities, with towers piercing the clouds and the citadel holding all the world's wisdom. I long to see those legendary buildings and libraries with my own eyes." Her childlike excitement drew a smile from him. He teased, the words touched with the irony of one who had seen more. "Believe me, Janice, after you've seen Valyria's ruins, the spires etched with runes, stabbing into the heavens, every so-called wonder in this world will pale in comparison. Valyria's glory had long surpassed mortal craft. Its towers were born of magic and power. Against them, even the citadel was but a shadow. Their movements were a tightly held secret. Apart from Roro and Hal, who were busy preparing the coronation, no one else knew the truth. Even Jorah Mormont believed Quen had gone with Jaelina's host to Torturer's Deep. There were no ceremonies, no farewells. Quen and Janice boarded the warship. The sailors loosed the mooring lines, oars dipped into the deep blue sea in unison. With the command, the sails unfurled, swelling with wind. The ship glided from Prince's Port, once Saladar's pride, and cut across the calm waters, striking southwest into the summer sea. Toward the southern tip of Westeros they sailed, bound for Aldtown, the city of wisdom and the great beacon of the Hightower. Chapter 67. Speculations on Hightower origins. For 7 days the vessel glided over sapphire blue waters, carried along by gentle currents and warm summer winds. In the latter half of the journey, the fertile lands of the Reach slowly unfolded along the riverbanks. Sunlight poured generously over endless fields, where emerald ridges crisscrossed like veins of the earth. Rolling hills, cloaked in deep green forests and lush meadows, dotted the landscape. Farmers labored in the fields, fishermen cast their nets across rivers and lakes, butchers creaking donkey carts wound along country lanes, and merchants' cries echoed through the marketplaces, all alive with vigor and abundance. Amid this serene, almost languid countryside, Quen and Janice's ship entered the harbor of Aldtown. That morning, a thick, milky fog hung low over the sea and the city, wrapping everything in hushed stillness. Only the coarse, energetic cries of gulls pierced the haze, ringing through the damp air. On the bow, Quen and Janice stood side by side, their robes fluttering in the salt-heavy breeze. Their eyes strained past the shifting veil, drawn to the massive silhouette rising above the mist on Battle Island, the High Tower. 700 feet tall, its structure was built of fine white marble, radiating a soft, sacred glow even within the fog. At its peak, a blazing fire cut through the haze, guiding ships and wanderers alike. Its history stretched back to the Dawn Age. The grand white tower that now stood was the culmination of countless expansions by House Hightower. The first watchtower had been a mere 50 feet, a crude wooden structure. In those days, Hightower ancestors still huddled within shadowed halls, domed chambers, and fortresses of rough black stone. Through generations of rebuilding, the High Tower was reborn into the colossal stone stronghold it became, an enduring symbol of House Hightower's glory and power. As the ship passed the towering stone sentinel guarding the mouth of the Honeywine River and drifted toward the bustling harbor of the Whispering Sound, a sea of masts, sails, and clamorous voices, Janice's violet eyes lit with curiosity and a touch of familiarity. She turned to Quen. "My lord, is this the High Tower, the stronghold of Lady Linnis's house?" During their days in Torturer's Deep, she and Linnis had grown close. The melancholic Hightower girl had often shared tales of her family's ancient and noble history. Indeed, Quen nodded, but his gaze was fixed not on the shining marble spire above, but on the immense foundation beneath it. There, a square fortress sprawled, built of massive, rough-hewn black stones, dark and heavy. It clung to the jagged rock of Battle Island, its lines stark and ancient, radiating a raw, primal force in sharp contrast to the purity above. The black base bore the tower's splendor in silence, its formidable walls concealing whatever secrets lay within. Janice noticed where Quen's eyes lingered and followed his gaze. She studied the black stone for a long moment, her brows furrowed in thought, before murmuring softly. The texture of that black stone is so similar to the walls of Tyria. Quen inclined his head. The cutting and stacking of this black stone is nearly indistinguishable from Valyrian craft. Beyond Tyria's walls, the black wall of Volantis and the Valyrian roads all share the same style. Janice's violet eyes widened, astonishment flashing across her face. Are you saying that long ago, the Valyrians came to Aldtown and built this black stone foundation? Quen slowly shook his head, his gaze still fixed on the colossal structure. The chronicles say that even before the Dawn Age, the ancestors of House Hightower built this fortress. At that time, the Valyrian freehold did not yet exist, which means the knowledge of this black stone craft did not belong to Valyria alone. Confusion lingered on Janice's face as her slender fingers traced the ship's rail. But, my lord, to cut, transport, and fit such enormous stones so perfectly, without magic, it would be nearly impossible. Magic. A faint, knowing smile curved Quen's lips. Tell me then, Janice, where do you think Valyrian magic came from? Janice froze. Memories of old blood mage records she had once glimpsed surged to mind, and she gasped. You mean, House Hightower and Valyria share a common origin? Quen's smile deepened. Until now, his suspicions had been only theory drawn from ancient texts. But here stood the proof, silent and immense. A fortress of black stone, radiating ancient power, its craftsmanship indistinguishable from Valyrian ruins. House Hightower and Valyria were bound by a hidden tie, one far deeper, and far more profound, than anyone dared imagine. Janice, you've studied the Valyrian secret histories preserved by the Blood Mages. They clearly state that the ancestors of Valyria came from Yiti, far east of the Bone Mountains. More precisely, they were descended from the royal bloodline of the legendary Great Empire of the Dawn, the offspring of the Amethyst Empress and the Bloodstone Emperor. The Bloodstone Emperor murdered his sister and lover to seize the throne, turning his faith to powers from beyond the stars, and thus brought about the Long Night. His descendants fled in desperation. One branch crossed the Bone Mountains westward and founded the Valyrian freehold in the lands of the Long Summer. Which means House Hightower is very likely descended from another branch of those exiles. A wave of shock crashed through Janice, as if calm seas had been torn open by towering storms. She had never imagined that here, in the distant south of Westeros, thousands of miles from Valyria's ruins, the lords of the White Tower rising at the mouth of the Honeywine River might share blood with the Valyrians, bound by the same origin. The threads of history suddenly stretched before her, clearer, yet infinitely more tangled. Quen too felt the stir of unease, though his thoughts ran along a different line. What astonished him most was the timing. House Hightower had come to Westeros far earlier than the Valyrians had reached the lands of the Long Summer. As descendants of the great empire of the Dawn, why had they remained so subdued on Westeros's stage for thousands of years? They had never wielded power like the Valyrians, never soaring on dragonback, never burning cities to ash, not even famed for sorcery. Instead, they were known for wisdom, wealth, and unwavering faith. So what had they truly carried away from that ancient realm of blood and magic? Or what had they hidden? Did the silent black stone foundation, or the fire blazing atop the tower, conceal another legacy of the great empire of the Dawn, one the world had yet to see? As Quen pondered this vast mystery of origins and power, the ship around him suddenly grew loud with movement and voices. He drew back his gaze and saw they had docked smoothly at Aldtown's crowded wharf. Pushing aside the tumult of thoughts, he turned to Janice. We're here, let's go ashore. For now, the secrets of House Hightower could wait, there were more urgent matters ahead. Together they followed the throng down the gangway, leaving behind the port with its press of bodies and mingled scents of fish, sweat, and foreign spices. They walked along the cobbled street by the Honeywine, its stones worn smooth with age, heading toward the heart of Aldtown, the citadel. Mist still clung to the damp, chilly streets, and a flicker of surprise crossed Quen's face. Compared to Volantis, which he had seen before, Aldtown revealed a strikingly different character. It was cleaner, fresher, almost orderly in its very air. Stone houses, 3 or 4 stories high, lined the riverbanks in neat but varied rows, their roofs covered with dark red tiles. Though slick with mist, the streets were free of filth and stagnant puddles. What struck him most was what he did not see: no ragged beggars slumped along the roadside, no gangs of idlers stirring trouble. The peace was remarkable. And unlike Volantis, there were no slave masters cracking whips, no slaves cowering beneath them. Here, only the cries of vendors filled the air as they hawked melons, peaches, apples, and fireplums from the reach. The fragrance of fruit and the warm scent of fresh bread drifted on the breeze. From the quill and tankard, perched on its river island, laughter and the clinking of glasses floated faintly across the water. Quen paused at a fruit stall, bought a few ripe, glistening pieces, and handed them to Janice. For the girl who had spent so long in Torturer's Deep, when had she last tasted anything so fresh, so sweet? Janice accepted them eagerly. As they walked, she bit into a juicy peach, its nectar flooding her mouth. Her eyes closed with delight, and a pure, joyful smile lit her face, as if it banished both the chill of the mist and the weariness of their journey. The heavy fog above the city seemed to lift, drawn away by an unseen hand. On the eastern horizon, the rising sun tore free of its shroud of clouds, spilling gold and crimson light across the world. Morning spread like a brushstroke over Aldtown's bustling streets, its tall towers, its clustered rooftops, draping them in warmth and brilliance, while casting long, deep shadows across the ground. Quen's eyes were drawn to the grand silhouettes of faith that loomed against the sky. The solemn spires of the Sept of the Seven, the sweeping arches of the Lord's Sept, the sigil of the Sailor's Sept, and the great dome of the Starry Sept, symbol of the endless heavens. These temples rose vast and commanding, their scale immense. In the morning light, intricate carvings seemed to stir with life, and domes soared upward as though to pierce the sky itself. Then, sunlight broke fully through the clouds, bathing the whole city in a sacred blaze of gold and crimson. Dong, dong, dong. At that moment, solemn bells rang in turn from the towering septs, their deep voices reverberating across the air. The sonorous chimes wove together above the city, as though a grand hymn were rising to greet distant travelers. And so, accompanied by the roll of the morning bells, Quen and Janice at last reached their destination, the Citadel. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 68. Farewell to Marwyn. On either side of the Citadel's ancient, weighty gates crouched 2 colossal green-gray sphinxes. The one to the left had a stern, angular male face. The one to the right bore gentler lines and a serene female visage. Weathered by centuries, they loomed like silent sages, their deep-set eyes watching every visitor who passed between them. Between the 2 statues stretched a broad staircase of white marble, rising directly to the Citadel's great gate, the symbol of wisdom and mystery. Quen and Janice climbed the steps and reached the entrance. At the top stood a semicircular desk, where several assistant maesters in grey wool robes, each with chains of different metals at their throats, lounged idly as they handled the small petitions of Aldtown's residents. Quen went straight to one of the older assistants. From his breast he produced a sealed letter, which he handed over with a calm, steady tone. Good morning. Please announce us. We wish to see Archmaester Marwyn. This is a letter from a distant friend of his. I believe its contents will interest him greatly. His words, and his striking appearance, immediately drew the attention of the other assistants. One by one, they looked up, their eyes full of curiosity as they studied the silver-haired, violet-eyed pair standing before them. The assistant who had taken the letter wrinkled his nose slightly, his voice edged with quiet suspicion. Lysini. He had clearly mistaken them for Valyrian descendants from the Free Cities. Quen nodded without hesitation. Before arriving, he had used the ruby Chai Yi gave him to cast a simple illusion, altering his features. In Essos, Valyrian looks were common enough, but his true face in Westeros might have drawn unwanted trouble. Yet, to his surprise, the resistance he half expected never came. The assistant only murmured briefly with a colleague to confirm whether Marwyn was within the citadel and receiving visitors. Then he called over a young apprentice and instructed him to deliver the letter at once to Archmaester Marwyn himself. The wait was not long. Soon the apprentice came running back, breathless. The Archmaester asks for you. Please, follow me. He led them through the citadel's labyrinth of corridors and arched passages until they stopped before a heavy oak door. Before the boy could knock, a rough, rasping voice barked from inside, harsh as sandpaper scraping wood. Ah, get in already. What are you dawdling for? The apprentice flinched at the sound, as if relieved to be dismissed. He quickly pushed open the door, gestured them inside, and then slipped away in haste. Quen and Janice stepped into the chamber. Marwyn's office was less a study and more a chaotic alchemist's den, crammed with strange objects and hazardous contraptions. Books, scrolls, and parchment lay piled in heaps on the floor, across tables, even spilling from chairs. Odd-shaped glass vessels brimmed with powders and liquids of unsettling colors. Rusted metal devices of unclear purpose leaned against the walls, which were plastered with star charts, anatomical sketches, and diagrams scrawled with esoteric symbols. Archmaester Marwyn himself was hunched over a mess of papers, as disheveled as ever. He lifted his head, and his sharp, penetrating eyes, keen enough to strip a man bare, raked over the two figures at the door. For an instant, expectation flickered in his gaze, but it was quickly replaced by suspicion. I thought it would be the Yiti boy. So why? He bared his mottled teeth, stained with a disturbing red hue, and growled in irritation. Too frightened to come himself, so he sends you two messengers instead. Archmaester Marwyn, would I ever be so discourteous? Quen smiled easily, his composure unshaken. Without a sound, he tightened his grip on the ruby hidden in his sleeve. With a mere thought, the illusion rippled and faded like water, revealing his true features, the face of distant Yiti. The sudden change made Marwyn jolt upright from his chair. His eyes went wide, fixed on Quen as if he'd seen a ghost. For several long seconds he simply stared before finally exclaiming in realization, his expression twisting into a mix of annoyance and amusement. He strode quickly to the door, peeked out with sharp caution, then slammed it shut and slid the bolt firmly into place. You audacious little Yiti brat. Marwyn spun around, lowering his voice, the rebuke carrying both shock and lingering fear. You dare use a Shadowbender's trick in the citadel of all places. Do you even know where you stand? Quen arched a brow, his tone laced with mockery. What, do you think the maesters here would start screaming, heresy, and witchcraft, the moment they saw magic, then drag me off to burn on a pyre? Marwyn rolled his eyes and stomped back behind his cluttered desk. He shoved a handful of soreleaf into his mouth and chewed noisily as he muttered, HMPH. Not burned, no, but those grey-robed sheep are stubborn to the bone. Nothing disgusts them more than magic or mysticism. If you showed off your tricks in front of them, they'd first sneer and call it some cheap street performer's scam. Then they'd have the guards, politely, escort you out of the citadel like a fly, blacklist you forever. And whether they'd send someone afterward to study you, or deal with you, that, only the seven know. Quen smiled faintly, letting the matter drop as he cut straight to the heart of it. Archmaester, tell me honestly, setting appearances aside, do you truly believe magic is nothing more than smoke and mirrors? Marwyn stared at him as though he'd gone mad, chewing his soreleaf harder. You just pulled off a vanishing act right under my nose, and you ask me if I believe. Tricks like that, I saw them 500 times if not 1,000 in that pit of shadows, a shy. Unbothered, Quen pressed on with his true purpose. Then, Archmaester, would you be willing to leave this ivory tower of stifled thought and come with me? Help me solve a real magical riddle. His gaze was earnest, carrying an invitation that brooked no refusal. Marwyn's chewing slowed to a stop. He frowned, his heavy brow ridge casting a deeper shadow. Go with you, solve a magical riddle. He looked Quen up and down with sharp suspicion. Where do you come from? And where is this place of yours? The stepstones, Quen said calmly. Marwyn choked on his own spit. Cough, 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 cough. He hacked until his face went red, wheezing for breath. At last he steadied himself, eyes bulging as his finger trembled, pointing straight at Quen. The stepstones. Don't tell me, you're that eastern pirate lord the merchant sailors won't shut up about, the one ruling the stepstones. I didn't expect my name to travel all the way to Aldtown so quickly, Quen replied with a touch of amusement. Marwyn let out a harsh snort and dropped heavily into his creaking chair. Aldtown's the biggest port in Westeros. More ships pass through here than fish swim in the sea. With the stepstones in upheaval, trade routes cut to pieces, how could people here not know? He leaned in, voice dropping, his sharp gaze boring into Quen. Judging from your tone, you've dealt with that so-called Prince of the Narrow Sea, haven't you? Quen nodded evenly, his voice calm but heavy with force. Yes, the stepstones are mine now. Marwyn narrowed his eyes, leaning forward as if to strip away every layer and look straight into Quen's soul. So tell me, boy, why? Why go to all that trouble, crossing the sea to unite that cursed scatter of rocks? The Iron Throne won't tolerate some pirate king ruling the stepstones under their nose. And the free cities, Lee, Tirosh, Mur, you've strangled their trade routes, cut off their lifeblood. They'll come for you as well. Why not stay in rich, mysterious Yiti? Why stir the waters of the West? Quen spread his hands, a smile flickering across his face, casual yet carrying unfathomable weight. What if I told you, my goal is to conquer the world? To make the known world crawl at my feet. Would you believe me? Conquer the world. Marwyn froze as if struck by lightning, his mouth falling open wide enough to swallow an egg. In the dim light, his teeth, stained a disturbing red, glared all the brighter. Chapter 69, Marwyn's Decision. He stood frozen for several seconds before snapping back, blurting in a tone of disbelief, sheer madness. A dream fit for fools. Even the Valyrian freehold, at the very height of dragon might and magical glory, never managed to conquer the world. Do you have any idea what that would mean? The lords and knights of the Seven Kingdoms, the howling warriors of the Dothraki, the mercenary fleets of the free cities. Boy, even if you told me you meant to conquer Westeros, it would sound more believable. But even if such madness festers in your mind, why come to Aldtown, why to the Citadel, why to me? What cursed magical riddle could possibly demand the help of the old fool they scorn as the mage? Quen did not answer him directly. Instead, he glanced at Janice. She understood at once, carefully drawing from her leather satchel a heavy book. Quen accepted it and, with solemn hands, placed it before Marwyn. Marwyn frowned as he took the volume, but the moment his eyes fell on the script upon its cover, his clouded gaze flared wide with shock. He knew those letters, High Valyrian. His breathing grew ragged in an instant. Forgetting Quen and Janice entirely, he tore the book open with the desperation of a man dying of thirst stumbling on a spring, plunging headlong into its pages. At times he slapped his bald head in sudden revelation, laughing aloud as pieces of long puzzling mysteries clicked into place. At others, his face drained pale as he sucked in a horrified breath at the chilling details of forbidden rites. Then again, he would pound the table in triumph, muttering feverishly as age-old magical riddles unraveled before him. In the dim chamber, only the rasp of turning pages and his broken gasps filled the air. Time slipped away unnoticed. When at last he tore his eyes from the text, the shock etched on his face had not waned, it had deepened, carved even sharper into his features. Clutching the tome with trembling hands, he spoke hoarsely, breathless with urgency. This book, filled with such forbidden sorcery, where in the seven hells did you find it? His gaze burned into Quen, raw with hunger and demand. The book Janice had carried for him was none other than the forbidden grimoire drawn from the very depths of the Valyria ruins, its pages detailing the use of black stone and blood magic. Meeting Marwyn's searing stare, Quen smiled lightly and gave the answer Marwyn most craved yet least believed. The ruins of Valyria. Impossible. Marwyn's denial was instant, shouted in reflex. He lurched to his feet so suddenly the book nearly slipped from his hands. Utterly impossible. No one walks out alive from the smoking sea, no one. That place is cursed, forsaken by gods and men alike. Any who enter are. His tirade broke off mid-sentence. For Janice had drawn the sword at her waist. When the blade slipped free, it was not with a harsh scrape of steel, but with a ringing, resonant hum that filled the room. A chill light burst forth, cold, pure, so sharp it seemed to freeze the soul, searing through the gloom. The brilliance was blinding, its edge unmistakable, its power undeniable. Marwyn squinted against it, his eyes stinging. This is. The words choked in his throat as his gaze locked on the ancient, elegant blade in her hands. His pupils shrank with shock. Valyrian steel. The lost house sword of House Lannister, Quen said evenly. Brightroar. The legendary blade Tommen II carried into the ruins of Valyria, vanishing with him into that cursed land. Marwyn stood as though spellbound, staring at the sword's cold radiance, then at Quen's calm, confident face, then at the forbidden tome trembling in his grip. Every doubt, every impossible, melted away like frost beneath the sun. The raw shock on his face slowly ebbed, giving way to something else, a dazed, disoriented haze, as though his very world had been upended. At last he slumped back into his chair, eyes fixed on Quen, his voice rough with awe. Never did I think you'd return alive from that land of death, spurned even by the gods, and bring these back with you. His gaze swept once more over the Brightroar in the black book, his expression shaken beyond words. Archmaester Marwyn. Quen's voice carried the weight of command. In the stepstones, grimoires like this lie stacked high as mountains. They record Valyria's lost knowledge and seal away power that could reshape the world. Here in the Citadel, the truths you've pursued your whole life are dismissed as heresy, locked away, scoffed at, ignored. He stepped closer, his gaze burning. Come with me, Archmaester. There you'll find the magical mysteries you've dreamed of, ancient prophecies waiting to be unraveled, and treasures enough to reveal the world's true face. That's where you belong, not in this prison that shackles the mind. Marwyn's eyes flickered with hesitation. But I am of Westeros. I swore my oath at the Citadel, to serve its lords. Quen answered bluntly. If oaths truly mattered, the Iron Throne would still belong to the Targaryens. And more than that, Archmaester, your name. You were never meant to be accepted here. Marwyn froze, staring in disbelief. You know my name. Quen smiled. Marwyn Valyrian, a descendant of House Valyrian, who survived the doom. And Maester Aemon of Castle Black, I know his true identity as well. Marwyn could no longer maintain his composure. A bead of cold sweat slid down his brow. How do you know of such secrets, buried for so many years? In truth, Quen was only speculating. He remembered from the records that both Marwyn and Maester Aemon had been pushed aside by the Citadel. Anything real leaves traces in this world, he continued. Come with us, Archmaester. Stay here, and you'll never have what you seek. In the stepstones, you'll find everything you've ever wanted. Marwyn met Quen's gaze, his eyes torn with conflict. At last, obsession with truth outweighed every hesitation. He exhaled heavily, as if setting down a great burden. You've convinced me, boy. 7 hells, you really have. If you truly went to Valyria's ruins and brought these back. He gestured toward the sword and the book. Then I have reason enough to believe the treasures you speak of are real. For those long-buried truths, I'll go with you. The decision was made. A genuine smile spread across Quen's face. Welcome, Archmaester Marwyn. Your wisdom will be our greatest treasure. By the way, Quen added as if casually, do you know a maester named Qyburn? Marwyn's face darkened instantly, as if he'd swallowed a fly. Qyburn, why do you ask? His tone was sour. That man was just expelled 2 days ago. The Conclave found him guilty of an experiment that, well, grossly violated the Citadel's laws. He was cast out, and right now he's probably skulking in his stinking quarters, stuffing his rags into a bag before being shown the door. Quen's smile deepened. That's perfect. We're taking him with us. His tone was light, almost playful. He intended to recruit Qyburn as well. As for the man's fascination with human experimentation, Quen already planned to provide him with condemned criminals for his studies. What? Marwyn nearly sprang from his chair, staring as though Quen had gone mad. Boy, do you have any idea what foul experiments he was conducting? And you'd dare take him in? That man's a lunatic, a danger to everyone. Quen's smile turned enigmatic, almost knowing. I'd guess forbidden experiments with necromancy. Marwyn's jaw dropped. He jabbed a trembling finger at Quen, voice caught between shock and despair. Why is it you always guess so damned well? Back in Volantis, you said I'd earn some ridiculous title at the Citadel, and sure enough, that vinegar violin stuck me with, the mage, a laughingstock to all. And now you've guessed the truth of Qyburn's madness too. I don't even know what to call you. His tone dripped with frustration and disbelief. Quen's smile only grew steadier. That just proves you've made the right choice. Here in the Citadel, you'll only be mocked, pushed aside, your talents wasted. With me, you'll face true magic, decipher lost prophecies, and uncover the world's ultimate secrets. Qyburn's methods may be extreme, but his research direction, under the right guidance, might yield breakthroughs no one else could achieve. We need his talent. Marwyn was left speechless. With a groan, he rolled his eyes and slumped back into his chair. Fine, I can't argue with you. Take whoever you damn well please. Just tell me, what else? Say it all now. Quen's smile faded, replaced by solemnity. There is one more thing. Before you leave the Citadel, I'll need your help. Can you use your authority to access a specific record for me? A record? Whose? Marwyn frowned, irritation sharp in his voice. Of a former High Septon. Quen's eyes darkened. Maynard, I need to see his private diary. 1 comments 0 vote. Chapter 70. Rhaegar has gone mad. Beyond the Citadel's high walls, the noise of the city faded. Quen slipped into a narrow alley and stopped before a shabby wooden door, its paint peeling. He raised his hand and knocked. The hinges creaked open to reveal a tall, thin old man with a slight stoop. His weathered face was lined like a parched riverbed, blue eyes sunk deep beneath folds of skin, sparse gray-white hair clinging flat to his scalp. Most striking of all was the faint smile at his lips, at once kindly and quietly shrewd. "Hello," the old man said gently. "Who are you looking for?" Quen returned the smile. "Forgive the intrusion. Are you Maester Qyburn?" The old man's expression did not change. He gave a small nod, then slowly shook his head. 3 days ago, perhaps. But now the conclave has stripped me of the title. His voice was calm, as though stating something of no consequence. Meeting those mild blue eyes directly, Quen spoke without preamble. "Maester Qyburn, if I were to give you full support, resources, a secure place to work, even experimental subjects, for your research into necromancy and other fields, would you join my cause?" For a moment the smile in Qyburn's eyes wavered, a sharp glint flickering beneath it. He showed no outward surprise, only tilted his head, studying the stranger with quiet curiosity. "And who might you be?" His tone remained level, but carried a probing weight. "I am from the Stepstones," Quen replied evenly. "I came to the Citadel to seek out minds like yours, men driven to uncover the world's deepest mysteries, yet bound and scorned by prejudice." He mentioned nothing of Marwyn, but the words alone were enough to stir something in Qyburn. The smile at the corners of Qyburn's mouth deepened slightly. He asked no more questions, nor did he hesitate. He simply nodded. "I understand." Stepping aside, he gestured toward the interior. "Wait here, I'll pack my things. I can leave with you now." His tone was as casual as if he were stepping out to buy bread. Quen paused, surprised by how swiftly, and eagerly, he agreed. But he understood at once. This madman, cast out of the Citadel was, at his core, a pure scholar consumed by obsession. Give him the means to pursue knowledge, and reputation, identity, even morality itself meant nothing. Such a man, once his true need was recognized, was easily won. Quen watched him turn back into the cramped room and begin gathering his possessions, jars, odd specimens, papers covered in strange symbols, with a speed that was orderly, not frantic. The sight only strengthened Quen's conviction. Soon Qyburn emerged with a worn leather case in one hand and a bulging canvas bag in the other, clearly filled with his cherished notes and tools. "All set, let's go." The same calm smile remained on his face. Quen nodded and quietly led this freshly recruited talent from the alley. He escorted him to the oared galley moored at the harbor, guarded by picked men, and ordered the sentries to keep him safe. Only then, reassured, did he turn back toward the Citadel. When he pushed open the door to Marwyn's cluttered chamber, a mix of alchemical workshop and storeroom, the air inside was utterly changed. Marwyn sat hunched in his battered chair, surrounded by mountains of books, his face lit with a focus and solemnity Quen had never seen before, even tinged with humility. He was firing off question after question about blood magic at Janice, seated opposite him. She answered calmly, violet eyes shining with intelligence, her replies measured and precise. Now and then she quoted directly from the forbidden tome, and each time Marwyn's eyes went wide with sudden comprehension, his palm slapping against his thigh in delight. When he saw Quen return, Marwyn's head snapped up, his whole face alight with near-manic excitement. Pointing toward Janice, he cried out in his rasping voice, overflowing with awe and exhilaration. "Eastern lad, you're back at last. Gods, you've opened my eyes." Miss Janice, her grasp of magic's essence, her command of Valyrian sorcery, she could forge a Valyrian steel link here at the Citadel. "No, too, this girl is a genius." His tone rang with the joy of a man who had stumbled upon buried treasure. Janice flushed faintly at the praise, pale cheeks tinged pink, though her bright eyes never faltered. Quen gave her an approving glance, then turned to Marwyn and went straight to the point. "Archmaester Marwyn, what of High Septon Maynard's diary? Did you have it sent over?" "Diary? Ah, yes, yes." Marwyn smacked his shiny forehead as if just remembering, then leapt from his chair and lunged toward the desk that looked like a disaster zone. Both hands rummaged through the heaps of parchments, glass vessels, and mineral samples, muttering under his breath. "I remember, Petter brought it over and I just tossed it. 7 hells, where did it go?" Petter swore it was under this stack of drafts. Petter. Quen's heart gave a jolt. That mediocre apprentice who had lingered in the Citadel for years without achieving anything, never forging even a single link. The name pulled loose fragments of memory about that, nobody. Petter had been obsessed with Rosie, the serving girl at the Quill and Tankard, desperate to claim her maidenhood. To get the coin he needed, he struck a deal with a mysterious alchemist. He traded the master key stolen from Archmaester Walgrave, the key that opened every door in the citadel, for a single golden dragon. In the end, Petter died a fool's death, losing both life and fortune. But Petter's fate was not the point. What mattered was that the so-called alchemist, almost certainly Jachan of the Faceless Men, likely assumed his identity after his death, using the key to slip deeper into the citadel. Why would the House of Black and White go to such lengths, sending one of the many-faced god's finest servants into this fortress of knowledge? What was their true aim? One theory lingered in Quen's mind. Euron Greyjoy had once boasted to his brother Victarion that he owned a dragon egg, claiming he tossed it into the sea in a foul mood. But that had been a lie. The truth was that Euron, eager to rid himself of his brother Balon, had hired the Faceless Men. And the price he paid was likely that very dragon egg. If that were true, then Jaqen's infiltration of the citadel had a clear purpose. The Faceless Men needed a way, some lost secret, or some powerful relic, to awaken that fossilized egg. Quen's thoughts raced like lightning until Marwyn's gravelly cry snapped him back to the present. Ah, here it is. 7 bloody hells, how did it end up under this pile? I swear I checked here already. He pulled out a book with an ancient binding from beneath a mound of mineral samples, clutching it as if it were treasure. Its cover was deep red leather, trimmed with faded blue thread, solemn and mysterious. Quen stepped forward at once and took High Septon Maynard's diary from Marwyn's hands. Panting, Marwyn wiped sweat from his brow with his sleeve, peering at him suspiciously. High Septon Maynard served more than 10 years ago. Where in the 7 hells did you dredge up this old business? Quen didn't answer. He flipped through the fragile, yellowed pages swiftly, his eyes skimming the faded ink with precision. At last, near the end of the book, in a corner where the paper was frayed and curling, one entry seized his attention. The script was clear, written with solemn care. Quote, At the earnest request of Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, I dispatched a septon to the shore of God's Eye to officiate the sacred marriage between him and Lady Lyanna Stark, binding them in an eternal vow before the 7. Has Rhaegar gone mad? A storm of shock roared through Quen's mind. He had always believed the story of Rhaegar and Lyanna's marriage, shown in the series, was mere invention. Yet here it was, in black and white. But there was a difference. The diary didn't say Rhaegar sought to set aside Princess Elia. He meant to follow Aegon the Conqueror's path, 2 wives. Impossible. No, this can't be true. How could this be? Marwyn leaned over, cloudy eyes locking on the words. His face went ashen, drained of all blood. With shaking hands he tore the diary from Quen's grip, clutching it so tightly his fingers trembled. His voice rasped, cracking under the weight of disbelief. Rhaegar, he actually wed Lyanna, before the faith of the 7, bound in marriage under the gaze of the gods. Gods above. The shock nearly knocked him off his feet, his body swaying. If this diary were ever revealed, it would set all Westeros aflame. Robert's rebellion had been justified on the claim that Rhaegar kidnapped and imprisoned his betrothed Lyanna. This diary would tear that justification to shreds. If you'd like to support my work and unlock advanced chapters, you can follow me on Patreon. Up to 50 chapters ahead for now. Patreon.com/BlurryDream.